Ships have been around for at least 6,000 years, dating back to ancient Egypt. I wasn't around then. In the beginning, they were used for business purposes only, mostly trading and exploring. Ships as an attraction only became a thing a bit over 100 years ago. You might think it was the infamous Titanic, but you'd be wrong. The first cruise ship that took passengers on a voyage was a German ship called Prinzessin Victoria Luisa. It was launched in 1900 and served for 6 years. Of course, now they are more advanced and last longer, around 30 years. After that use-by date, it's no longer safe to travel due to metal fatigue, most often of the ship's hull. So, since ships don't have too long of a lifespan, it makes sense to build them big. I mean big, so they can accommodate as many passengers as possible. Your average cruise ship is 1,000 feet in length, or approximately 3 times as big as a football field. They're also tall enough to require elevators. They're also filled with different facilities, like restaurants, pools, and many other fun activities. Right now, the biggest cruise ship in the world is called Wonder of the Seas. It's 1,187 feet long, has 18 decks, and can host almost 7,000 non-crew passengers. It has 8 different neighborhoods, 20 restaurants, 4 pools, a water park, a full-size basketball court, an ice skating rink, rock climbing walls, and even a theater. So it's basically a floating city. Some people are permanent cruise ship residents. There's a luxury ocean liner called the World that offers permanent residence to 165 people. These people sail almost every day and never live in one place. So yes, cruise ships are enormous, and if you build them at once, they won't fit anywhere. So the ship is constructed part by part, prefab, often by different companies. Cruise cabins are built separately, and then they're added to the ship at the shipyard. Such huge ships sure have big anchors. An average anchor weighs like 4 grown elephants. The crew members try to avoid dropping the anchor when possible because such a massive thing can severely harm the ecosystems at the bottom of the sea. With around 2,000 cabins on average, it's impossible to ensure that every cabin has a window for the voyagers to observe the sea. So cruise ships found a solution. Interior cabins that don't have windows have virtual balconies that transmit real-life images from the outside of the ship, depending on where your cabin is located. Even if you get a cabin with a virtual balcony, you still have better accommodations than the crew members. They reside in a so-called B deck, which is located in the lower part of the ship below the waterline. There are dorm-style rooms with a bunch of bunk beds and lockers. Also, crew members have a secret language, code words that they use to exchange information without the passengers knowing. For example, the word Alpha or Star code signals a medical emergency. And Bravo, Bravo, Bravo means a fire on the ship. By the way, there's a bunch of stuff you aren't allowed to take on board because of potential threats. Those include candles, clothes irons, travel steamers, and hot plates. Basically, it's anything that produces flame or heat, with the only exception of curling irons and hair straighteners. Yeah, I never leave home without mine. Since people live on board for weeks, and often the ships spend days in the open sea, you can imagine that a lot of waste is produced every day from the thousands of passengers and crew the ship is hosting. So, where does it all go? Well, dumping trash in the sea or ocean is illegal, so the ship engineers devised a system. On a particular crew-only deck of a ship, there's a recycling station where all the waste goes from everywhere around the ship. Everything that can be recycled, paper, aluminum cans, all types of glass, and plastic bottles are collected, separated, crushed, and stored until the ship docks at a port and can send the stack to a recycling station. As for the food waste, all kitchens on board have a suction drain, which takes the food to one big pipe, which takes all of it to a hydroprocessor. The processor crushes the food into small pieces and then burns it. Now, the cruising capital of the world is Miami, Florida. Having 5 ports, Florida is the place where most cruise ships depart. Voyages are fun, but if you need to get somewhere fast, cruise ships shouldn't be your first choice, because they're slow. On average, they travel at the speed of 20 knots, which is just 23 miles per hour. Ships travel much slower than cars and planes because they move huge amounts of water. For instance, when you run on the ground, you're fast. No, really, I've seen you. Now step in a swimming pool and try to run there. It'll be way harder for you to do, and you'll be way slower, barely moving through. Now keep in mind that you're much smaller than a ship. As we've seen, ships are big boys. When you put something in the water, it displaces the amount of water that is equivalent to its weight. So, a ship displaces thousands of tons of water and then pushes through it, creating such a drag. That's why they're slow. Still, in a year, cruise ships sail around the equivalent of 3 times around the planet. Apparently, the passengers are there to enjoy the ride and not so much the velocity. Obviously, such ships need a boatload of fuel. And not just one, several types are required. Heavy fuel oil is used for the main engines, marine diesel is needed for smaller engines and lifeboats, and there's also marine gas oil for the turbines. Every day, each cruise ship burns, on average, 150 tons of fuel and releases exhaust equal to 1 million cars combined. So there are often regulations regarding how pure each type of fuel must be. In most parts of the world, ships can only use fuel that contains no more than 0.5% of sulfur, a component that highly contributes to air pollution. In other countries, the fuel must be even purer, containing only 0.1% of sulfur. The cleaner the fuel, the more expensive it is, so ships often change from one fuel grade to another, depending on the area the ship is sailing in. So, where do ships get so much of the stuff? Apparently, there are floating filling stations, so-called product tankers. They carry different grades of fuel and deliver it to the ship, connecting to the ship's fuel tanks and pumping the proper grade of oil into the section where it's needed. All cruise ships pick up stranded sailors and fishermen, and that happens quite often. So don't be surprised if your cruise ship stops in the middle of the sea to pick someone up. It's a common practice. Ships can even change course to pick up some stranded sailors if they get a distress call. But what happens if you, a passenger, falls over? You clumsy oaf. Hey, just kidding. Ships have sensors that should notice the accident and send a distress signal, but witnesses are still important. The person will be saved way faster. So, if you ever see someone falling overboard, here's what to do. Throw them a life ring, point at them and scream, "A person overboard!" and get someone to tell the ship's bridge. If no one is around, do everything it takes to get some attention. You can call the ship's emergency number or even activate one of the alarms. Afterward, it's up to the crew to do the rescue operation. By the way, crew members have a code phrase for a person overboard too. It's Oscar, Oscar, Oscar. And that's not for Oscar Mayer. It's a code unique to the Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. Ever since What Happened to the Titanic, remember the Oscar-winning movie? Every cruise ship is obligated to have safety equipment to accommodate 125% of the people on board, so you shouldn't be scared of history repeating itself, especially in the warm tropic islands. After around 30 years, when a ship has served its time, it retires and gets sent to a shipyard where it gets scrapped. Many famous and beloved ships enjoy a better fate. They get turned into hotels and attractions. Yes, it's good to be the queen. Welcome to the Spirit of Discovery cruise ship, which will take you on an unforgettable sea voyage around the Canary Islands. The azure endless ocean, delicious food, the highest service, premium cabins, and a terrible nightmare that you will probably remember for the rest of your life. This is exactly how one luxury trip of the Saga Cruises Company ended last year. Instead of relaxing during the cruise, passengers felt fear and horror, and even had health problems. And that's why. On October 24th, the Spirit of Discovery liner started a 2-week cruise around the Canary Islands. There were about 1,500 people on board. About 1,000 were passengers, and the rest were crew members. The first week went great, but then the liner encountered a serious problem called nature. There were strong winds and big waves. The captain decided to return to the UK ahead of time, but the decision was made too late. The ship was caught in a severe storm in the Bay of Biscay. A powerful wind with a force of 11 points hit the vessel. To make it easier for you to understand, the 11-point wind is able to tear out trees together with roots, destroy residential buildings, and plunge entire cities into chaos. Such a storm is rare, but Spirit of Discovery was unlucky enough to get into its epicenter. 11 points is the penultimate place on the Beaufort scale, which determines the wind rating. The most powerful storm has 12 points, and this is a hurricane. The wind reached a speed of 65 miles per hour, which is about the same as the average speed of a car on a highway. Not only did it push the Spirit of Discovery, but it also raised huge waves 25 feet high. Just imagine a wall of water the height of a 3-story building collapsing on a lone ocean liner. At that moment, the captain sent a message to all the passengers through the cabin speakers so that no one left their place. And his voice sounded worried enough. All the passengers had to lie down and hold on tight. According to the witnesses' words, the ship remained caught in the storm for about 15 hours. They held on with all their might so as not to crash into the walls and floor. All this time, tables were flying around the ship, dishes were breaking, furniture was moving all over the cabins. The waves smashed windows, partitions, and doors. Some people were knocked down because they couldn't hold on for so long. The storm hurled the passengers from ceiling to floor, from wall to wall. The ship's crew turned the dining room into a medical area to provide assistance to those who had been hurt. Despite the difficult and terrible conditions, the ship's team did a great job. They regularly informed passengers about the current situation and tried to calm everyone down. There was no panic and chaos on board. When the storm finally ended, the ship continued its journey and finally reached land, where medics urgently evacuated 8 passengers to the hospital. One of them was never able to survive this storm. It's good the ship didn't meet a rogue wave during the storm. This is a natural phenomenon that can appear during a storm and even in still water. It's a giant wave with a height of 60 feet. Like a 6-story house, it collapses onto a ship with incredible speed and capsizes it. And then the wave suddenly disappears. This is no joke. A similar wave has been recorded in the Gulf Stream off of Charleston, South Carolina. It's scary to get in its way. Now, let's go back to the past to remember one of the most terrible maritime tragedies. No, we're not talking about the Titanic. We'll talk about the Greek liner Laconia, which set sail from the English port of Southampton on December 19, 1963, with more than 600 people on board. However, just 3 days later, a terrible tragedy happened to the ship in the boundless waters of the Atlantic. At 11 p.m., in the barbershop hall, an electrical malfunction occurred. The problem led to a fire, which quickly spread to other rooms. The crew couldn't cope with it, since the fire was spreading too fast. The ship's team turned on the fire alarm, but there was no command to leave the vessel. Only 2 hours later, the captain ordered the passengers to evacuate. All this time, people were either relaxing in their cabins or enjoying a party in the ballroom. The crew was probably trying to put out the fire without causing panic. However, when the situation became critical, the evacuation began. People panicked and ran to the lifeboats, but many didn't manage to get inside. One of them was John Morris. He survived this catastrophe and shared his memories of how he put his family in a lifeboat while he stayed on board the ship. He didn't even have a life jacket. Since there was nowhere to go, the ship's crew opened a bar so that people could relax a little. However, at that moment, boilers began to explode inside the ship, and it became clear the vessel wouldn't stay afloat for too long. John Morris decided to jump into the water right in his tuxedo. As soon as he was overboard, he grabbed onto a piece of wooden deck cargo and swam as far away from the ship as he could. The giant liner could sink at any moment, and when such a huge object goes down to the seabed, it forms a water funnel that pulls along everything around. Rescuers arrived at the scene sometime later. Fortunately, John Morris's pregnant wife and young son were alive, but his mother-in-law unfortunately didn't survive the disaster, like many other people that day. Of course, after this incident, the Greek Ministry of Merchant Marine initiated a thorough investigation. For 2 years, they collected information from passengers and the captain, studied the technical characteristics of the ship, and eventually came to certain conclusions. According to them, the ship's crew gave the evacuation order too late. Not all passengers were able to get into lifeboats, but half of those boats remained on board because of the chaos that prevailed during the evacuation. Several officers of the liner were accused of negligence, but the captain and his first mate received the most criticism. As for John Morris, he stated that he felt himself under protection that day. Another unusual story happened on a cruise ship relatively recently. Spoiler alert, the ship didn't sink, there was no evacuation, and the weather was good. However, for many passengers, this journey became a real challenge. Imagine that you've been working for a long time and saving up money to go on your dream trip on the Celebrity Mercury cruise ship in the Caribbean. You arrive in South Carolina, from where the ship begins its journey. You get on board, looking forward to a week's rest. At first, everything is fine. People are having fun, chefs are cooking delicious dishes, and beautiful daytime landscapes turn into night parties. But then suddenly, many passengers start throwing up. Someone is in a hurry to go to the toilet, and someone stays and vomits right in the halls. The cruise turns into chaos. More and more people feel terrible because of unknown poisoning. You also visited the restaurant and eaten seafood, but fortunately, the disease has avoided you, which can't be said for more than 400 other passengers. Almost every 1 in 4 people on board face gastrointestinal problems. There were almost 2,000 people, and a quarter of them are in bad condition. Crew members do endless cleaning. They wash the deck, give people nausea pills, and ask them not to leave the cabin till the illness passes. The captain sends several samples ashore to determine what caused the poisoning. Unfortunately, the cruise is already ruined, and all the passengers have unpleasant memories. So the company organizing the trip issues certificates that can be used on future cruises. It's not the most pleasant experience, but it's still better than nothing. Now, imagine if, instead of just feeling sick, people got infected with some kind of bacterium that would turn them into zombies. It would be much more exciting and scary. Now, do you think you could survive on such a ship full of zombies? And how would you do that? Tell me about it in the comments.
Ah, cruise ships. Amazing views, exotic destinations. What more could you ask for? While cruising on a megaship is usually super safe, it's good to know some of the secret codes they use on board. One of the scariest things you might hear is Code Red. That means there's a virus running rampant on the ship, and they need to do a serious deep clean. Sick passengers are stuck in their cabins until further notice. But the only announcement that might give you chills is Operation Rising Star, which means a passenger has passed away. On a lighter note, Operation Bright Star, not to be confused with Brightside, refers to a less critical medical emergency. If you hear PVI, that stands for a public vomiting incident. Yep, you heard that right. Some cruise lines have their own versions of this and just yell Purell, Purell, Purell to get the crew moving. There are tons of codes to keep track of, and let's be real, it's hard to remember them all, especially if you're not cruising all the time. So, here's a quick tip. If there's a fire or other emergency, you'll hear a general alarm bell. That means 7 or more short blasts of the ship's whistle, followed by 1 long blast. That's your cue to head to the muster station. Cruise ships are packed with unexpected features that many folks, especially first-timers, might not realize. Some of these floating hotels are massive, almost like small cities. While it's pretty easy to get the hang of all the fun stuff, think water parks, tattoo shops, and tons of dining options, there's also a whole hidden world below the decks that remains a bit of a mystery. So in most cases, there's a morgue, which makes sense as you never know when you hear Operation Rising Star. With millions of passengers cruising every year, it's sadly not uncommon for people to pass away on board. Because of this, many ships are equipped with a morgue and extra body bags just in case. Usually found on the lowest deck, the morgue is a small, stainless steel room that can hold anywhere from 2 to 10 bodies, depending on the ship's size. If someone dies, the ship's staff will alert the authorities back on land. A medical team will check things out and then move the body to the morgue until arrangements can be made. Typically, the body is taken off at the next port, but sometimes it stays on board until the cruise wraps up. Okay, and what if there's a real criminal aboard? Spoiler alert, you won't find any police on a cruise ship, but most of them still have a small jail, often called the brig. If passengers get a bit too rowdy and breach the cruise line's rules, the security team might just lock them up for a while. Yeah, it's not an official jail, it's more like a detention center. Cruise ships are fantastic for socializing, but sometimes you just want a quiet spot to relax and recharge. Luckily, there are plenty of secret hideaways on even the biggest ships where you can find your peace and soak in the views. To start, aim for the forward or aft ends of the ship. These areas are usually less crowded. You'll find cozy deck chairs, hot tubs, and maybe even the space to yourself. Check out the ship's daily schedule to spot activity-free lounges. For instance, the observation lounge might be empty during certain hours, and many ship libraries are perfect for a peaceful nap. On Seabourn, try the aft pool and hot tubs on Deck 5 for serene ocean views. Carnival ships have hidden forward decks where you can enjoy captain-like vistas. Royal Caribbean's Oasis-class ships have a track area at the back where you can relax while watching joggers. Viking's Explorer's Lounge has a quiet second level that's often overlooked. Disney Magic and Wonder have a little-known lookout on Deck 7. While Silversea's Silver Origin features a stargazing platform perfect for night sky watching. Royal Caribbean's helipads and Carnival's Deck 5 Lanai hot tubs are also great gems for some sunshine and tranquility. Now, when you think of pirates, images of Captain Jack Sparrow likely come to mind. Sure, there was media hype around Somali pirates, but are they still a problem? Not exactly. But even so, passengers on cruise ships traveling through high-risk areas near the Horn of Africa can be briefed on what to do if pirates attack. To keep things safe, outdoor activities must be shut down after dark. Cabin lights are better to be dimmed, and passengers are normally told to stay inside their rooms if warned of a potential attack. Despite this, the risk to cruise ships remains low. There's never been a successful attack on one. Anyway, experts admit that it's quite challenging to identify threats in these vast waters. While small pirate boats might be faster, larger cruise ships can usually outrun them and have structural features that resist boarding attempts. Measures like razor wire and fire hoses are among the defenses cruise lines employ to keep passengers safe. Though cruise lines stay tight-lipped about their specific strategies, ensuring passenger safety remains their top priority. Also, when you board your cruise ship, there are some key terms you should know about the layout. The front is called the forward, and the back is the aft. You'll find staterooms on both sides and in between, each with its own perks. Forward staterooms offer fantastic views, letting you enjoy the scenery just like the captain at the bridge as you sail into port. These rooms often have a bit more space thanks to the ship's angled shape. However, keep in mind that they experience more motion from winds and waves, which some cruisers love. While forward verandas are rare and can be windswept, the ocean view staterooms here often feature bigger windows for amazing vistas. On the flip side, aft staterooms provide stunning views of the ship's wake and great sights as you leave port. These rooms also typically have larger verandas, sometimes L-shaped, perfect for relaxing. Many dining options are also found towards the aft, making mealtime convenient. Just know that these rooms can be a bit further from elevators, requiring some extra walking. Don't forget to check the ship's deck plan before booking. If noise is a concern, avoid staterooms near busy areas. And finally, higher decks are usually pricier but offer better views and access to pool decks. Hey, you know how I-95 is one of the most crowded highways in the US? Well, there's also an I-95 on cruise ships, but it's just a hallway. This I-95 is down on Deck 0, and that's where the crew is hustling away under your feet. It's the crew's lifeline, where they do their laundry, hit up the nurse if needed, transfer your luggage, and sneak back into their tiny cabins for a breather. Now, if you romanticize working on a ship, let me try to talk you out of it, especially if you're into food. You won't be treated for leftover stuff. These are just rumors circulating online. It's true that the food isn't as luxurious as for passengers, but it's still quite okay. And if someone from the crew wants to treat themselves to something special, they can make a trip to a grocery store at a port to stock up on their favorite snacks to enjoy in their cabins. Yep, the crew members literally live on a ship. Their rooms are tiny and don't even have windows. Picture a bunk bed crammed into a space where the top bunk is so close to the ceiling, you end up bumping your head every morning. They have a tiny closet and just 2 drawers, which means you can only fit a couple of outfits. And what about bathrooms, you may ask? They're so cramped, you could sit on the toilet, take a shower, and brush your teeth all at the same time if you really wanted to. As for sleep, they don't really sleep at night. Instead, they catch cat naps throughout the day. It's tough to squeeze in a full night's sleep when shifts can last over 12 hours, and any free time usually goes to traveling, eating, or partying.
More than 25 million people boarded cruise ships globally back in 2017. It may not seem like a lot, but that's more than the total population of Belgium. It's a great vacation alternative with an added bonus. You can sample various different destinations for future time off in one single trip. If you've already booked a trip on a cruise ship, but you still have no idea what you should pack, start with some research on your specific cruise location. Either way, be sure to bring deck-friendly shoes that are low-heeled. Also, add a pair that's comfortable to walk on larger distances for the days spent ashore. Depending on the season, you might want to add a few swimsuits too. If you're on any type of medication, make sure you bring it with you in its original packaging. If you're a light packer, don't worry. Most cruise ships come equipped with laundry rooms. They're kind of pricey, especially if you want your garments to be washed, ironed, and folded for you. But it does save you the extra hassle of packing more clothes or washing them for yourself. It's really important that you check in with your credit card company before boarding a ship, more so if your itinerary includes one or more foreign countries. Your credit card might get frozen if there's any unusual activity on your account. Most of these companies have algorithms that get triggered once there are charges from different countries in rapid succession, which is exactly what you'll be doing on a cruise ship. Letting them know beforehand saves you the embarrassment of having your card declined at some fancy restaurant. To make sure you get the best room, before booking it, check out the ship's deck plan. It should be available on their website. If it's peace and tranquility you're looking for, don't go for the rooms directly above or below any of the ship's entertainment points. Also, if you have a history of getting seasick, try to skip the rooms that are available at the front of the ship. Rather, go for those located in the middle of the ship on a lower deck. You'll feel less movement. If it's your first time going on a cruise, you might be surprised to know that some cabin rooms don't have windows. Before making a reservation, make sure to check out all the amenities of the room you intend to book. Most cruise liners add a bunch of pictures from the common rooms on their reservation pages, and it might be a bit confusing as to what you're getting exactly for that specific price point. Also, some rooms on board are quite small too. If you don't like to sleep in small spaces, you might want to upgrade to a larger room, even if it's a bit pricier. You can always split the cost with a friend if they want to join you on the cruise. With the help of modern technology, even if a specific location doesn't have windows, it doesn't mean you can't watch the waves. How, you might ask? Fancier cruise ships feature a secret, added bonus. In the areas with no access to sunlight, specialists have built virtual balconies. These high-tech screens work by showing you what's going on outside in real time. They have an added benefit too. In case of bad weather, guests can still have a feel of the outdoors, without the wind or rain ruining their hair or their outfit. It may not be the real deal, but it still beats getting claustrophobic on board. Planning on going on a budget cruise? It might not be such a bad idea, especially if you're on the lookout for last-minute upgrades. You might even end up vacationing like a millionaire without having to spend money like one. These upgrades sometimes include things like a private balcony in your room, maybe some spa services, or even better prices for high-end meals. If they aren't all booked by the time people board the ship, they might be open for the rest of the passengers for way better prices than initially listed. There might be hidden freebies on board if you pay close attention. Things like complimentary pastries on board late in the morning or a late-night cup of tea on the house might be some of the things offered to guests. You only need to ask. You might want to check out what other tourists are doing. Some people with more experience cruising can offer pretty great tips and tricks. Don't be afraid to start a conversation if you see someone getting something for free. Some cruise ships do go all the way on the fancy dial. They even have exclusive areas designed for guests staying in expensive suites. Most of the time, they're located at the top of the ship. On one particular cruise, these types of guests have designated staff members called Royal Genies, which are similar to butlers. They can cater to just a few cabins. Since the cruise line wants to divert other guests from asking them various questions, which will take time away from their assigned guests, the genies do not wear a name tag in public areas. Most common areas of cruise ships do require travelers to follow a dress code, but if you do your research in advance, you might find that some areas are more relaxed when it comes to what people need to wear. Most cruise ships require people to adhere to smart attire, which means pants with a collared shirt for men, or blouses and skirts, dresses, or stylish pants for the ladies. As for the travel destinations, be sure to research the ports you're about to visit in advance. You'll know what to wear, what the weather will be, and if you need to pack anything else, like an umbrella or a beach towel. Stops on cruises only last for a few hours in most cases, so you'll want to get the most out of them. If that specific location includes museums or art galleries you want to add to your checklist, be sure to book in advance so you don't waste time waiting in lines. Some cruise ships even provide their guests with private tours of the ports they're about to visit. Do make sure to book them in advance if this is something you might be interested in, as the list gets pretty full quite fast. Independent tours are a bit more private. You can spend time with your tour guide and even ask more questions. Always remember to put your phone in airplane mode while on board. Most cruise ship horror stories involve cruising newbies that ended up paying thousands of dollars in cell phone charges while on ships, just because they forgot to turn it off. If you're the type of person that can't switch off their phone, be sure to check with your cell phone provider before traveling internationally. Some can provide special plans for limited amounts of time, without extra charges. You'll be free to chat, call, or browse YouTube videos without worrying you'll end up paying a fortune. Most cruise ships also provide you with complimentary Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi packages that can be purchased in advance, which are way more affordable. You can stick to communicating with your friends and family back home via FaceTime or Skype. People that have heard about the Titanic tragedy will always wonder what might happen if something goes wrong while on board. Let's take lifeboats, for instance. The Titanic had a mere 20 lifeboats on board, which were tragically not enough to fit all the passengers after the ship hit the iceberg. Some fancy cruise ships these days have an even lower number of lifeboats, anywhere from 15 to 18. Sounds strange? Well, not really, given the fact that each lifeboat can accommodate up to 370 people. Even the largest ships, which have an estimated capacity of 8,000 people if fully booked, including tourists and staff, are safe in case of an emergency. It's June of 1857. A fierce storm slams into Geechin Bay, Australia, and rips apart a Dutch ship weighing 800 tons. Part of the crew tries to escape in a small boat, but only 9 of the 25 men on board survive. Now, many years later, researchers believe they've found this long-lost gold rush shipwreck. Yep, this ship is tied to one of the most dramatic high-stakes chapters in Australia's history. We're talking about the shipwreck of Koning Willem de Tweede, a vessel built back in 1840. This historic ship discovery is a big deal since it's now considered a real treasure in the world of underwater archaeology in Australia. Let me tell you why. By the middle of the 19th century, Dutch ships were carrying not just goods, but also people from Asia who were hoping to start a new life in Australia. And they were all chasing one thing: gold. Yep, the precious metal was discovered in Australia in 1851. Well, officially at least. It was actually found a few years earlier, but let's just say the authorities decided to keep that little detail away from the newspapers. Anyway, the big public discovery happened in 1851 when an Australian gold prospector named Edward Hammond Hargraves led an expedition in the New South Wales region, and he chose to tell everyone about his find. And just like that, the gold rush began. News spreads fast, so people start arriving from everywhere: Britain, Ireland, Germany, the Netherlands, and also from China. It's estimated by that time around 20,000 Chinese had made their way to the goldfields in Victoria. By 1861, about 3% of the Australian population had been born in the Asian country. Most of them came from the southern region of Guangdong, which was going through a really tough time back then. They'd been through it all: foreign invasions, massive floods, serious food shortages, you name it. Many people had lost everything. Their money was gone, their homes destroyed. They couldn't even afford a bite to eat. There was no clear way out of the poverty they were stuck in. But then, word started to spread. There was a goldfield somewhere in a distant British territory. They heard stories from people all over the world going there, that it was peaceful, full of opportunity, and that the land itself had everything you could need. It sounded like a dream. Before long, they began calling it Xinjin Shan, or New Gold Mountain. So, many scraped together what little they had left to reach Australia and start over. It was a shot at a better life, a chance to lift entire families out of poverty. But getting there wasn't cheap or easy. They had to travel in huge ships, and the average trip from Guangdong province took about 3 months to reach Sydney or Melbourne. At some point, Australian authorities decided to impose a tax on Chinese arrivals. Every passenger who disembarked at Victorian ports had to pay a 10-pound poll tax. So what do you think happened? The routes changed, of course. Instead of docking directly in Victoria, ships began stopping in Robe, a town in the southeastern part of South Australia. From there, people would walk about 250 miles all the way to the goldfields, just to avoid paying the tax. And this area is exactly where the Koning Willem de Tweede was discovered. Yep, our Dutch ship was found off the Robe coast, and it was one of many vessels that carried Chinese passengers to Australia. Now you can see why it's historically important, right? On the 16th of June, 1857, it brought around 400 people safely to shore so they could start their lives over. The ship itself didn't get a happy ending, though. After dropping them off, it was supposed to continue its journey, but then a storm rolled in. So, the ship had to drop anchor and wait it out in Geechin Bay. The weather kept getting worse. The anchor began to drag, and by the 13th of June, it was completely lost. The captain, called Hendrik Geisen, had to act fast. He made the call to beach the ship in hopes of saving both the vessel and his crew. But there was a problem. The ship ran aground on Long Beach, about 3 miles east of Robe, and it started breaking apart quickly in the rough seas. The rest of the story is tragic. 16 sailors drowned when one of the ship's small boats turned upside down. Only 9 men made it out alive. Captain Geisen stayed aboard the wreck. He eventually reached the shore by clinging to a cask. Thankfully, people who were on the beach managed to pull him out of the sea using a rope. A few months later, things from the wreck were sold to a local man in Robe named Jacob Chambers for £225, which was a pretty big amount of money back then. And that's because people were able to save a good amount of stuff from the wreck, like the bell, some doors, and wooden planks from the hull. Those doors and some of the timbers were later used to build the Caledonian Inn, a historic 2-story stone hotel that went up in 1859. As for the bell, it was supposedly used at Robe Primary School for over 100 years, but researchers aren't so sure about that part. What we do know is that most of the ship's remains were still missing, until now. After 3 years of hard work, a team affiliated with the Australian National Maritime Museum believes they have finally found the Koning Willem de Tweede. The project kicked off in April of 2022, and its main goal has been to search for, locate, and carry out an archaeological survey of the shipwreck's remains. To do that, they mainly used 2 tools: underwater metal detectors and a marine magnetometer, a device that detects changes in the magnetic field of the seafloor. Soon, this technology started picking up a bunch of anomalies in the area where the shipwreck was believed to be. And by anomalies, I mean weird signals. Clues that something might be buried under the seabed, probably hidden under layers of sand or mud. They believe those signals were coming from the iron parts of the ship's windlass. That's a big winch at the front of the ship used to pull up the anchors. Some of those pieces were sticking up slightly from the seabed, along with a partially exposed iron frame. They also spotted a well-preserved wooden plank underneath the windlass, which suggests that more of the ship's hull is still down there, just buried under the sand. So why do they feel confident that this wreck is the Koning Willem de Tweede? Well, basically for 3 reasons. First, the location. The spot where they picked up those signals lines up with historical accounts of where the ship went down. And it just so happens to be the only known shipwreck in that part of Long Beach. Second, the size. The cluster of magnetic signals roughly matches the ship's documented length, which is about 140 feet. Third and last reason, they found pieces of Chinese pottery from the 1800s right on the beach next to the site. When you put all those facts together, it basically screams Koning Willem de Tweede. That's why the team feels so confident they've finally discovered this historic ship. But even though they have good reasons to believe it, more research still needs to be done, so they're planning future visits to the site to keep monitoring things. The goal is to check the ship's condition and look for more parts of the hull or artifacts that might get uncovered as the seabed shifts over time. Let's hope they get lucky next time around. For years, the world's most valuable shipwreck was just a legend, until now. It has finally been found, and among the wreckage was a real treasure worth $1.1 billion. To understand this better, we need to go back to 1622. That year, the mighty Spanish galleon Nuestra Señora de Atocha set sail from Havana, packed with riches belonging both to King Philip IV of Spain and to the wealthy members of the crew. We're talking about gold, silver, copper, and emeralds from Colombia, Peru, Mexico, and Venezuela. The cargo was so large, totaling more than 40 tons, and so vast that it took 2 months to transport it to the ship. The ship was also packed with people. There were 265 people on board. At first, everything went well, but then came the Florida Straits and trouble. The crew found themselves lost in the night that was not only cold, but also stormy. And before long, they were facing a powerful hurricane. The wind tore the masts apart. Giant waves destroyed the rudder, and soon, the Atocha was sinking toward the darkness of the seabed. The disaster that night meant a huge loss of wealth for King Philip IV, but even worse was the loss of life. Of the original 265 crew members, only 5 survived. They managed to climb up the mizzen of the ship, the only part that remained above water. With all that treasure gone, the Spanish were quick to spring into action and devised a salvage operation. 5 ships were sent to recover the cargo. The plan seemed simple and easy. After all, the hatches were securely locked, so the treasure could still be there. But almost immediately, things went wrong. For example, one of the 5 ships ran aground before it could even begin its journey. In the end, the search dragged on for 60 years, and many factors contributed to the mission's failure. That may not seem so bad today, but back then, divers didn't have the technology or safety equipment that we have today. Exploring the seabed was risky, and more often than not, it led nowhere. While searching for the Atocha, the rescuers found traces of another vessel, the Santa Margarita, the Atocha's sister ship. Another hurricane passed through the region a month after the sinking. The seabed became a jigsaw puzzle with pieces of the ship scattered everywhere. The rescue mission became almost impossible. Over time, the Spanish managed to recover part of the Santa Margarita's cargo, but Atocha's treasure seemed lost forever. Even so, no one forgot that story. Then in 1969, more than 300 years after the sinking, everything began to change. An experienced deep-sea diver, Mel Fisher, stepped in and decided to rewrite history. Mel had already spent a big part of his life at the bottom of the sea. He and his wife even ran a diving school in California. So, Mel gathered his family and moved to the other side of the country. He led a new team of hunters whose mission was clear: to find the lost treasure of the legendary Atocha. They had little more than a boat, some diving equipment, and metal detectors, but that was enough to get them started. They focused on a region called the Matacumbe Keys, mentioned in several 17th century documents. In the first year, they traveled more than 100,000 miles but found absolutely nothing. It seemed like an impossible dream. But Mel still had a card up his sleeve. Eugene Lyon, a historian who would change the course of the search. Eugene delved into the Spanish archives in search of clues about the shipwreck. It was there that he found an important document that mentioned a group of people trying to save it. On the last page, it was mentioned that an area 100 miles from where Mel was searching had been the scene of the main exploration. This little piece of information was the needle in the haystack they needed. They rerouted the ship and soon arrived at the new location. But there was a challenge. That part of the ocean was deeper and the visibility there was almost zero. It was difficult to see your own hands. However, Mel knew how to deal with the adversities of diving and came up with a simple and brilliant solution. He installed 2 large tubes on the boat called letterboxes. Those tubes could be lowered in front of the propellers. The idea was ingenious. They sucked clean water from the surface and directed it to the bottom of the sea, exactly where the divers were. This technique not only cleared the murky water, but also helped to reveal objects that had been hidden for centuries. And still, the search took 16 years. During that time, Fisher found many lost items. Then, in 1971, they discovered a huge anchor. This was the first clue that they were close to finding the Atocha. In the following days, more objects appeared. Cups, swords, and ancient nails turned up. To keep everything organized, the team created a circular map. On it, they marked the exact location of each item they found. They also used radio transmitters on land and a receiver on the boat, which allowed them to know precisely where they were. The system was so efficient that it could measure the position with a margin of error of just 1 foot. Over time, a line began to form on the map, pointing to where the Atocha's main treasure might be hidden. They followed this trail for 2 years. Just when they were starting to lose hope, they found silver bars. It was the year 1973. This opened the door to much bigger discoveries. The silver alone was worth over $100,000, but the real treasure was yet to come. On July 20th, 1985, valuables that would be worth around $1.1 billion today were finally discovered in the main hull of the ship. The treasure included 180,000 silver coins, 24 tons of silver bars, 125 gold bars, a collection of pearls, and 66 pounds of emeralds. Some of these finds were priceless, not only because they were rare, but because of their history. The Atocha Cross, the Royal Orb, and the Atocha Ring, 3 royal artifacts, were found in near-perfect condition. The Atocha Cross was the most valuable of all the artifacts. It had 9 brilliant green emeralds set in 22-karat gold. A true treasure from the past, shining once again after centuries underwater. Soon after the discovery, the state of Florida thought, wait a second, we want a piece of that treasure. They went to court, demanding a whopping 25% of the value. A bitter legal battle ensued, and it lasted 8 years. It even went all the way to the Supreme Court. But in the end, treasure hunter Mel emerged victorious. He was even invited to The Tonight Show, showing off a massive gold chain found in the wreckage, wrapped around his waist like a belt. People called it the money chain, and for good reason. The find was so big that the wreck was declared the world's most valuable by the Guinness Book of Records in 2014. After the initial excitement, Mel sold some of the gems, but the bulk of the treasure remained in the family for a while. What was left was auctioned off. No one knows exactly how much the jewels were sold for, but one thing is for sure. Their value has skyrocketed over the years, and it's not just about the sparkle, it's about the legend that lives behind them. Today, these treasures are part of the Particular Museo Collection, the largest private collection of the Atocha artifacts in the world. And no, they're not for sale. But the good news is that you can still see them. They're on display, shining brightly in homage to Colombia's rich history and the famous mine from which they came. The people behind them say that these emeralds are as iconic as the rubies of Mogok or the sapphires of Kashmir. And honestly, they're right.
On a fine summer night of August 30th, 1892, a shipping magnate took his family for a cruise on Lake Superior. They were traveling on the Western Reserve, which was supposed to be one of the safest ships of its day. It was made of a type of steel like that used to construct the infamous Titanic, and it ended up with a similar tragic destiny. The ship broke in two and was found only 132 years later, in 2024. The 300-foot steamship was the first steel-plated freighter on the Great Lakes. One newspaper called it the Inland Greyhound because of how quickly it cut through the water. Peter H. Minch was the owner and inventor of this vehicle, which had been built just 2 years earlier in Cleveland. On the night of its last voyage, the ship set off toward Two Harbors, Minnesota. Minch brought along 5 of his family members: his wife, their 2 kids, his sister-in-law, and his niece. There were also 22 crew members aboard. It was a pleasant and smooth ride while they were sailing across Lake Huron. But as soon as they left Whitefish Bay, the lake turned wild, and the crew had to drop anchor for a while. Later that evening, as they entered Lake Superior around 9 p.m., a fierce summer storm moved in with powerful winds and crashing waves. Then disaster. The ship began to split in two. Within just 10 minutes, the Western Reserve was completely underwater. Everyone managed to get into lifeboats. The Minch family, with some crew members, took the wooden one, and the remaining 10 people got into the metal one. But the storm was so brutal that the metal boats sank right away, and only a few made it into the other lifeboat. That second boat floated for the next 10 hours. A steamship passed by, but didn't notice or hear the people calling for help. Around 7 o'clock the next morning, the lifeboat got within a mile of shore near Deer Park, Michigan. They were so close to safety, but sadly, the lifeboat flipped too, and they all ended up in the freezing water. The only survivor of this tragedy was 24-year-old Harry Stewart, the ship's wheelsman. He swam a full mile through the freezing water and made it to shore, almost unconscious but alive. He later mentioned he survived only thanks to a heavy-knit, close-fitting pea jacket. The Western Reserve was lost for over 100 years until a couple of determined explorers finally tracked it down. They spent over 2 years searching non-stop for the wreck off Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Daryl and Dan Erdl found it using a side-scan sonar that looks half a mile out on each side. One day, they saw a tiny blip on the left side of the scan. It was small, but Daryl measured the shadow, noticed that it was about 40 feet tall, and realized it must be something important. So they turned back and scanned directly over the spot. They saw cargo hatches and the wreck that looked like the ship had snapped in two, with one half lying on top of the other in an almost impossible position. Each piece measured around 150 feet long, and once they checked the width, they knew for sure that they had just found the legendary Western Reserve. Historians are still not sure why the vessel, that was supposed to be unsinkable, suddenly snapped in half, but they have a few solid theories. One idea is something called hogging. It happens when the ship rides up over a giant wave and the bow and stern are left hanging in the air with nothing underneath to support them. That puts a large amount of pressure on the middle, and it bends down like a stick when you're pulling both ends. Another plausible reason concerns the steel the vessel was made of. Back then, steel was the hot new substitute for iron. But quality control wasn't perfect. Some steel plates weren't made very well, which could have caused a serious weak point in the ship's body. There's also the chance that the ship didn't have enough ballast, which is the weight used to keep it stable, or maybe it wasn't balanced correctly. Sadly, just 8 weeks after the Western Reserve tragedy, another vessel that had been built at the same time with similar mill runs of steel plate repeated the destiny of its twin. The W.H. Gilcher was a steam freighter used to transport cargo between ports on the Great Lakes. It set out on what was supposed to be a routine trip on October 26, 1892. Loaded with over 3,000 tons of coal, the ship left Buffalo heading for Milwaukee. Captain Leeds H. Weeks and a crew of 18 were on board. Everything seemed normal at first, and by the afternoon of October 28th, the ship passed through the Straits of Mackinac and entered Lake Michigan. It was expected to reach Milwaukee by the 30th, but it never made it. A massive storm slammed into Lake Michigan and Lake Huron on October 28th and 29th, and created havoc on travel plans for many, many ships. When the storm finally passed and boats started pulling into port, people began to piece together what happened to the W.H. Gilcher. One captain who was sailing nearby on his schooner said he saw a large steamer battling the storm about 20 miles northwest of North Manitou Island around 8 p.m. on the 28th. The ship looked helpless, and there was no movement or sign of life. Another captain later saw furniture and parts of the ship's bridge floating in the lake near South Manitou Island. Then 2 more steamers picked up broken pieces of W.H. Gilcher's pilot house in the same area. It became clear that the storm had destroyed the freighter, and tragically, no one survived. The Great Lakes are a hot spot for shipwrecks, and there have been between 6,000 to 10,000 of those starting in the 17th century. Back in 1679, the Griffon became the first European vessel to vanish without a trace on the lakes. It sailed all the way from Buffalo, New York, to Green Bay, Wisconsin, passing through Lake Erie, the Detroit River, Lake St. Clair, and Lake Huron before reaching Lake Michigan. After a stop in Green Bay, it started heading back, and then it was never seen again. In 1975, one of the most famous shipwrecks happened when the massive 729-foot ore carrier SS Edmund Fitzgerald sank in Lake Superior. A fall storm was supposed to stay far south of their route, but things changed fast. Another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, was following behind and kept in radio contact with the Fitz's captain, Ernest McSorley. By the afternoon of November 10th, waves were smashing over the deck, and wind gusts at over 80 miles per hour were hitting both ships hard. By 7:20 p.m., the Anderson couldn't reach the Fitzgerald by radio anymore, and it had vanished from radar. There was no distress call, no warning. The huge ship had just disappeared. Later, search crews found the wreck over 530 feet under the surface, broken into two giant pieces. No one of the 29 crew members survived, and no one witnessed what really happened. There could be all sorts of reasons for such tragedies, from errors in judgment and equipment failure to simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Great Lakes are massive bodies of water with weather systems that you would expect to find in seas. These inland seas sit deep in the middle of the continent, and hurricane-strength winds and powerful storms form here. Many of them hit in November and December, when the waters are still warm from the summer, but Canadian cold air is starting to push down. There's a huge difference in temperature between the air and water. This difference and strong winds lead to massive waves. Plus, ice forms more easily in fresh water than in salt water. It builds up on ships quickly, and crew members also have to get around tricky ice waters. Water levels here are also unstable. In wet years, storms are more likely to happen, and this makes the risk of damage or disaster higher.
360 years ago, a massive British ship, the London, blew up in the Thames estuary. The tragedy took over 300 lives, including the sailors and their loved ones. No one knows exactly what led to all this, but scientists are finally getting close to the truth. Divers accidentally found an exceptionally well-preserved bronze cannon from the ship. This cannon, that was buried in silt and clay for centuries, could have all the answers. The London was a service ship built for the Navy of the Commonwealth of England. It set off on its first journey in June 1656. The ship played a huge role in British history as it was part of a convoy that went to the Netherlands in 1660 to collect Charles II and restore him to the throne. 5 years later, in March 1665, it was traveling from Chatham to Hope. From there, the Admiral Sir John Lawson was supposed to take it to the sea. But just before reaching the buoy of the Knower, the gunpowder suddenly blew up on the ship. About 25 people who were in the roundhouse and coach survived, but over 300 drowned. The ship broke into two pieces. Henry Bennett, the Earl of Arlington, passed along rumors that it all happened because of cheap, low-quality gunpowder that was on the ship. When experts of that time inspected the shipwreck, they concluded that the cannons could still be salvaged, but the ship itself was a total loss. Later, when someone recovered some of them, in 1679, there was a scandal where they tried to use them to settle a completely unrelated debt. In 2005, divers rediscovered the London. To protect it, port authorities even had to move the shipping lane, and a team of archaeologists got to work exploring it. That wreck is a big deal because it gives us real insights into English naval history. Visibility in the Thames estuary can be terrible. Sometimes you can't even see a foot and a half in front of you. Working on the site is also super tough because it's in a crazy tidal environment, and a busy shipping lane, where huge cargo ships constantly pass by, is still near. So when a cannon suddenly appeared, stuck deep in the clay, it meant the conditions had to be absolutely perfect. Experts believe the find is from the Commonwealth era, and it's medium size, about 8 feet 6 inches long. It was part of a special set made specifically for the London and was placed on the ship's lower deck. Every single gun carriage on the London was one of a kind because all of its cannons came from different countries and different periods in naval history. Big cannons were really rare and crazy expensive to make since they needed tons of bronze or iron and had to be individually cast. That's why the Navy often grabbed cannons from captured rival ships, old shipwrecks, or decommissioned vessels. The new find is one of the clues that could eventually help scientists to solve the mystery of the London tragedy. So far, they've also found leather shoes, pieces of instruments, wooden tools, rope, and a compass. All these artifacts are like puzzle pieces to them. They still don't have enough evidence to be sure, but it looks like both the pipe and candles could have been sources of flames that set off a larger bang. Some workers made another amazing find at a flooded quarry in nearby southeast England, about 60 miles southeast of London. They stumbled upon the remains of a rare Elizabethan-era ship hundreds of yards away from the nearest coastline. Finding a ship from the late 1500s is a huge deal, because very few vessels from that time have survived. Studying it could help scientists answer some big questions about an important era in history, when England was becoming a major player in European trade. Today, the quarry site is about 1,000 feet from the sea, but back in the 1500s, it was actually part of the coastline. Archaeologists think the ship either wrecked on a rocky headland or someone dumped it there when it was too damaged to sail anymore. Scientists haven't identified it yet, but they studied over 100 pieces of its wooden hull, reading the tree rings, and found that it was built from English oak trees cut down between 1558 and 1580. At that time, Northern Europe was switching from the old clinker method, where the planks overlapped like fish scales, to the carvel style from the Mediterranean, where the planks are smooth and flush against each other, nailed to an internal frame. Old wood usually rots away pretty fast when it's exposed to air or water. But if it's buried under a thick, oxygen-free layer of mud or silt, it can survive for centuries. That's exactly what happened here. The team is using laser scanning and digital photography to document everything about the wreck. Once they finish their research, they plan to rebury the timbers under the silt in the Quarry Lake, so the ship can stay there safe for many more centuries to come. A team of archaeologists in Norway found a ship in an even more unexpected location, in a flat field. There's a hill nearby called Gel Mound. It's actually a huge burial monument that the Vikings themselves had built. The farmer who owns the field wanted to dig some drainage ditches, but first, he needed experts to check for anything important underground. Archaeologists used a high-resolution georadar attached to a tractor-like vehicle. When they scanned the field, they discovered that it used to be packed with burial mounds, at least 8 new ones nobody had ever found before. And beneath one of the mounds, the radar picked up the outline of a ship. Back in Viking times, ships were super valuable, so they only buried them with really important people. Scientists have only found 3 boat burials in all of Norway before, and this is the first new one in years. The team believes this ship is from Viking times, probably between the years 500 and 1000 CE. Because the burial mound above it got flat over time, the ship is now only about 1.6 feet below the ground. That's super close to the surface. It's around 66 feet long, and the radar showed that parts like the keel and the floorboards are still preserved. The archaeologists plan to explore more using non-invasive tools so they don't wreck anything by accident. If they need to, they'll start an excavation. Far away from Norway in the Namibian desert, a miner looking for gems accidentally found a legendary shipwreck almost 500 years old. The workers called in an archaeologist to check it out, and they thought it must have been the remains of a Portuguese trading ship, the Bom Jesus, that had mysteriously vanished in the 1500s. The Bom Jesus had left Lisbon loaded with treasures, aiming for India. But somewhere along the southern tip of Africa, a brutal storm slammed it into the Namibian coast. The ship smashed into rocks, broke apart, and disappeared under the waves. When archaeologists explored the wreck, they found parts of the ship scattered across the shore and buried under thick sand, which actually saved the remains from rotting away. They even discovered treasure, over 40 tons of cargo that had spilled out of the captain's chest underwater when the hull broke. There were cannons, swords, fabrics, tools sailors used to navigate by the stars, and most impressive of all, 1,845 copper ingots, solid pieces of metal weighing 16 to 17 tons in total. Scientists could even read the old trademarks stamped on them, revealing they were made by a mega-rich German trading company. And then there was the real jackpot. More than 2,000 gold and silver coins from all over the world, Portugal, Venice, France, and the Moorish states. plus 105 giant elephant tusks weighing about 2 tons. The tusks were likely on their way to become luxury goods like jewelry and fine carvings. DNA tests later showed the ivory came from West African forest and savanna elephants. They didn't find many bones though, which means the crew either managed to escape or were lost forever at sea.
In some regions of the Pacific Ocean, ships sink very easily, which is why it is feared by many sailors. Although there are many routes in that area, there are some that few dare to risk because crossing them can mean facing extremely dangerous forces of nature. If you need to travel from Asia to America by ship, the most obvious route would be the shortest and quickest. That is, a nearly straight line under the North Pacific Ocean. But instead, it might be better to avoid crossing this place and opt for longer and more expensive but much safer routes. There is not one, but several reasons. The Pacific is home to some of the most dangerous waters in the world. When we open a world map, we usually see that the Pacific Ocean is kinda divided, which prevents us from realizing how big it is. But in reality, this giant covers almost a third of Earth's surface. It's about 10 times larger than the smallest ocean in the world, the Arctic Ocean. In other words, when crossing it, the chances of being cut off from any landmass are very high. And in cases of emergencies, mechanical failures, or even storms, help might take days or even weeks to arrive. This significantly increases the risk of serious accidents, the possibility of cargo loss, and, in more serious cases, something even worse. Now think about it. A ship journey from Santos, Brazil to Cape Town, South Africa covers a little more than 3,400 miles. To get from Callao, Peru to Shanghai, China, you need to travel around 10,000 miles. Another major problem that prevents sailors from crossing the Pacific is storm systems, whose name already indicates what they contain: unpredictable and therefore dangerous storms. In addition, near the equator, there is a chain of winds called trade winds that directly influence the climate in the tropical region and occasionally cause rain. Trade winds are strong and constant winds that act like a whirlwind that rotates without stopping. And although they are extremely important for nature, as they spread moisture through forests and even influence the formation of deserts, they pose a problem. Their intensity changes depending on the season. In winter, for example, they can be much stronger. And since these winds are responsible for moving the ocean waters, they also create strong sea currents that could make the journey much more dangerous. In 2015, researchers came across a series of extremely strong winter trade winds that caused a surge of short but intense waves in the Pacific Ocean. They observed that those waves began to hit the ship with constant force, as if they were repeatedly punching it. As a result, the hull structure was completely twisted and deformed. And in the end, they confirmed what they had already known. Those waves, caused by winter trade winds, could be a real threat to vessels. And by the way, do you remember that help in the middle of the Pacific can take a considerable amount of time to arrive? So, now there is much more than one reason behind the hostility of the winds. Such a large ocean doesn't have many geographical barriers, such as mountains or large islands. It means that there are no land structures around it that could hold back or slow down the winds and currents. So the trade winds and ocean currents have complete freedom to gain strength and speed. This explains why the Pacific is the scene of powerful storms and giant waves. This is different, for example, from the North Atlantic, where North America, Europe, and Africa help to contain and redirect the atmospheric and maritime systems. It is now very common for scientists to see the bottom of the Pacific Ocean as a giant jigsaw puzzle because it's literally full of moving pieces. It's home to the largest number of tectonic plates on the planet, and one of them, the Pacific Plate, is the largest maritime plate that science has ever identified. This particularity makes the region extremely unstable to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Even though the ocean may seem calm at first glance due to its geology, things can change very quickly. This makes it unpredictable and treacherous. For example, in 2022, the cargo ship 1 Apis was crossing the ocean, 1,600 miles northwest of Hawaii, when it was caught in a torrential storm. As a result, more than 1,800 containers were damaged, falling to the bottom of the sea. Hundreds more collapsed on the deck, turning into a real-life steel domino due to the force of the wind. The captain managed to steer the ship to Japan. The journey lasted about a week, and it was only when they got there that they understood the extent of the loss. But it wasn't just the 1 Apis. The following year, the ship Maersk Essen lost about 750 containers, while the Maersk Eindhoven lost more than 260. In both cases, the routes were bound for Asia. These three alone have already accounted for much more than the global annual average of containers lost at sea, which is about 1,382 per year. And the most curious thing is that these events happened in winter. Speaking of winter, it was in the winter of 2020 that the Pacific made history. Scientists recorded a 58-foot high wave in the ocean, which is equivalent to the height of a 5 or even 6-story building. In general, a wave is considered giant or extreme when it's more than twice the height of the others around it. This one, however, was almost 3 times bigger than the rest. Now, it's important to remember that despite being rare and scary, these waves are not a tsunami, as they're caused by wind. Tsunamis, on the other hand, usually occur after underwater earthquakes or volcanic eruptions. Another big monster of the Pacific are typhoons, and the 2024 typhoon season confirmed this. One of the highlights was Hurricane Christy. It did not touch the crust, meaning it did not cause direct damage, but we cannot underestimate it. Christy reached Category 5 on the Saffir-Simpson scale, which is the maximum level. A hurricane of this degree is considered catastrophic, so it's no wonder that it was powerful enough to generate huge waves and extremely dangerous rip currents. In addition to this, there was also Super Typhoon Yagi, which hit the Asian continent with such force that it gained the reputation of the most powerful in the last 70 years. When it arrived in Vietnam, it caused around $1.6 billion in damage, destroyed infrastructure in several cities, and left a trail of victims wherever it went. As if that weren't enough, the Pacific is also home to one of the most unstable regions on the planet, the famous Pacific Ring of Fire. It's a huge, crack-shaped area that's home to intense volcanic and seismic activity. It's the most tectonically active place in the world, as the plates of the Earth's crust are constantly moving there. They move apart and collide, or grind against each other, which causes the region to experience earthquakes and volcanic eruptions all the time. Seismographs record some type of tremor there every 5 minutes. This dangerous region is responsible for about 90% of the planet's earthquakes. So, 9 out of 10 tremors occur within this ring, which stretches across the northern Pacific. And the worst part is that it doesn't just affect North America or Asia. In 2023, tremors linked to the Ring of Fire were felt in several Latin American countries, such as Argentina, Chile, Ecuador, and Peru. There was a trail of destruction, and the lives of around 15 people were lost. There's no shortage of reasons for ships to avoid the shortest route across the Pacific and opt for longer routes. As the popular saying goes, prevention is better than cure.
The year was 1865. It was a boom of migration worldwide, with novel places discovered and new settlements created. Without planes like we have now, a ship was the only way to escape from the old life and journey towards a new, hopefully brighter future. So, a voyage like that was quite a regular thing to do. More than 500 immigrants safely reached Queensland, and the ship was supposed to head back to London sometime later. It was indeed a long journey, but not many people were willing to return to England. After all, they had chosen to come to Australia to create a brand new life, so it was only natural that the ship would come back nearly empty. However, the return trip was still quite lucrative, thanks to the cargo the ship would carry. The amount of produce ready to be shipped was substantial, primarily consisting of wool soaked in arsenic, tallow, and hides. It was two birds with one stone. Not only could the crew wait out the winter, warm in Australia, while England endured bitter cold, but they also wouldn't waste their time. With the sheer volume of produce to be loaded, it would take them around 3 months to accomplish this task. Reports were circulating that the Fiery Star was almost done loading up, but it turned out that the assessment was a bit too optimistic. To pass the time, Captain Ewell thought it would be a good idea to reach out to the Acclimatization Society and offer to help transport any animals they wanted to send to England on the Fiery Star. He already had some emus and kangaroos on board, but there was still room. The society held a vote, and they were totally on board, pun intended, with Captain Ewell's idea. They figured sending some taligalas would be a great plan. Even though a few of these birds were already in England, the French Society needed a couple, and they could get them shipped there through England. Little did the crew know that all this cargo, all the produce they were willing to sell in England, would ultimately lead to the ship's destruction. Not only was the Fiery Star lost, but most of the people on board did not survive to complete the voyage. March 23rd. That was the day when the ship manifest was finally published. A manifest is a list that details the cargo, passengers, and crew of a ship, plane, or vehicle, primarily for customs officials. This document helps those involved in the transport verify that everyone and everything that was loaded is still on board when the vehicle reaches its destination. Once it's published, it means the ship is almost ready to depart. There were 3 possible ways of passenger accommodation. First, there was the saloon, the antiquated name for first class. Next, there was the second cabin, which is, logically, second class. Finally, there was the steerage, the cheapest form of passenger accommodation on a ship. Back in the 19th and early 20th centuries, many people traveled from their homelands, often to North America and Australia, looking for a fresh start. Most of them were poor and had limited funds for travel. In total, there were 8 people in the saloon, another 8 in the second cabin, and only 21 steerage passengers. Out of the 37 passengers, only one, John Omond, would make it out alive. He bought a ticket for the steerage, so unlike the Titanic situation, in this case, the class didn't really matter. The crew members list wasn't as detailed as the passengers. It was known that, in total, there were around 55 people in the crew, from able-bodied seamen to crew members simply called boys. But there's something telling me that the crew wasn't really that important for the captain. In reality, all that mattered to him was to make as much money as possible, shipping tons of dangerous, flammable cargo. Out of over 50 crew members, only 17 survived that voyage. But there was actually one more crew member who actually survived it all, just because they weren't let in. Sarah Johnson disguised herself as a man and planned to sneak onto the ship. However, something about her looks made the captain get suspicious, so he called the police and made Sarah leave the ship as he didn't want any immoral behavior to take place. Well, he saved her life. For him, it was the last voyage. The captain, W. Hunter Ewell, was quite a celebrity apparently. He already had a record of the safe landing of immigrants in the previous year, so there seemingly was no reason to worry. The trip promised to be safe. Clipper Fiery Star left Moreton Bay bound for London. The passengers took their places. The cargo had already been loaded. The full list is astonishing. In addition to all the wool, tallow, cotton, hides, and horns, there were also 6 cases of arrowroot and various other packages. And we can't forget the animals the captain took aboard too. The Fiery Star was far away, yet still observable to the east as it headed toward the Pacific Ocean. This was the last information available until May 26, when news of its destruction emerged from Brisbane. Chief Officer William Sargent's log reveals that the Fiery Star took 12 days to reach the southern tip of New Zealand, passing on April 11, 1865. The trip was going well until heavy seas ruined 2 longboats on April 17. On this day, a strong odor of smoke alerted the captain. When he checked, he found the lower hold completely filled with smoke from a fire fueled by the ship's flammable cargo. The hatches were quickly closed to try to contain the flames, but by the next day, the heat and toxic smoke had forced passengers out of their cabins. George Maber was one of the lucky survivors. He was the ship's engineer, and he recalled the chaotic events on April 20th, as Captain Ewell and most of the crew and passengers tried to evacuate in rough weather. At around 6 p.m., the ship took on water, and without much warning, Captain Ewell, 4 crew members, and a few female passengers hopped into a lifeboat and headed out. The next boat, managed by the second mate, Mr. Adio, was a gig, followed by a crowded jolly boat. Lastly, there was a waste boat, which was barely seaworthy, with 2 men constantly bailing water to keep it afloat. The plan was for the boats to stay close to the Fiery Star overnight and head for the Chatham Islands the next morning. But by dawn on April 21st, all 4 boats had vanished without a trace. On the burning ship, there were 17 crew members and passenger John Oman, who banded together under Chief Officer William Sargent's leadership. For 5 days and nights, George Maber pumped water on the fire without rest. He volunteered to go down the forehatch with a rope around him and a handkerchief over his mouth. He discovered that the foremast had been burned through for about 7 inches, and the port side was severely damaged, resembling an empty shell. Exhausted, he returned for fresh air, but later descended again with Quartermaster Marshall to access a water tank. They couldn't open the lid, and as George crawled over the hides, he felt himself sinking. When they reached the deck, they collapsed from exhaustion. The cargo had been destroyed by smoke and fire, and the heat on the deck was intolerable. The crew survived on limited rations and caged chickens, using every spare piece of wood, including pigsties, for the pumps. Distressed pigs ran wild in the heat. A raft was constructed, but was too weak for the open sea. Sleep was elusive, and the crew had lost everything, with only hopes of reaching land or meeting another ship. Finally, the Dauntless appeared and sent a lifeboat to the Fiery Star. Captain Moore boarded the Fiery Star on May 12th, and after assessing the situation, he agreed that the crew could do no more. They boarded the Dauntless at 4 p.m., witnessing the Fiery Star succumb to flames by 11:30 p.m. It was a narrow escape.
2 sailors were traveling not far from the infamous Bermuda Triangle when they noticed a boat that seemed to be moving by itself. The sails on it were down and the motor wasn't running. One of the men was Matt Rutherford, the first man to ever sail non-stop on his own around North and South America, who has seen a lot during his voyages. But this one was spooky even for him. An awfully abandoned boat that could be hiding scary things inside. Rutherford still decided to approach and inspect the vessel to see if there was someone aboard who needed help. This story happened in 2013, but the sailors waited for 10 years before they published the footage. The ghost ship, which turned out to be named Wolfhound, looked like an upscale one, and it probably cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It seemed like whoever abandoned it was leaving in a rush. There were clothes and other personal belongings all over the main cabin. Some parts of the ceiling had fallen and some drawers had popped open. Rutherford was afraid to open doors in cabins, so he carefully searched the boat step by step, and luckily found no people who would need help. The sailors decided to tow the ghost ship back to Bermuda. It wasn't easy because Wolfhound was bigger and heavier than their boat. After days at sea, the crew was running low on fuel and asked a passing freighter to stop and give them some gas. They kept pulling Wolfhound with just sail power until the tow line got wrapped around the rudder, and they realized they could get stranded in the Bermuda Triangle. So they had to abandon the ship. After another 23 days in the Atlantic, they finally reached Bermuda. As it turned out later, the mysterious ghost ship belonged to an Irish yacht club member. It got caught in a storm with waves that were 20 feet high and super strong winds, and couldn't continue its voyage. A Greek cargo ship rescued the crew, but they had to leave the ship. Rutherford and his crew found the yacht 9 weeks later. Wolfhound is one of more than 50 ships and 20 planes that disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle since the mid-19th century. The first ship, at least officially documented, was the USS Pickering. It departed from Delaware to the West Indies in 1800. There were 70 people aboard. No one ever heard anything from them ever since. And perhaps we'll never know what exactly happened to them and where the ship is now. The largest ship that has ever disappeared in this mysterious area is the USS Cyclops. In March 1918, carrying a crew of 306 people, the USS Cyclops left Barbados and headed home to Baltimore. It had tons of dense manganese ore on board, which was used in steelmaking. Something happened during its 9-day voyage when it was passing through the Bermuda Triangle. The last message from Cyclops said, "Weather fair, all well," and then it disappeared forever, without even an SOS signal. Another ship that the Bermuda Triangle supposedly took forever was the Cotopaxi in 1925. It was loaded with coal and had a crew of 32 people on board. Its trip was supposed to go from Charleston, South Carolina to Havana, Cuba, but something went wrong and the ship disappeared. Recently, scientists discovered that the Cotopaxi was lying at the bottom of the ocean about 35 miles from St. Augustine, Florida. Divers who like to go down to the wreck nicknamed this spot the Bear Wreck, but didn't realize they were exploring the remains of the Cotopaxi. One of them, Michael Barnett, was trying to identify the wreck for over 15 years. He carefully measured different parts of the shipwreck that survived underwater with his team. When they compared these measurements with old blueprints of the Cotopaxi, they saw that everything matched up perfectly. The size and position of the boilers were exactly as described in the blueprints. This helped them confirm that they had found the Cotopaxi, and it looks like there was nothing mysterious about its disappearance. It was a combo of bad maintenance, poor care, and rough weather. Many of the hatches used to access the cargo hold where the coal was stored were either broken or missing. This meant that if the ship ran into a storm, water would easily get into the cargo hold, and the ship would get unstable and sink. As the Cotopaxi sailed off the coast of Florida, it met a tropical storm. Just before it disappeared, it sent out a distress call. It was near St. Augustine, so all the puzzle pieces fell into one place. People have come up with all kinds of ideas to explain what might be happening in the Bermuda Triangle. The wildest one is that spaceships from other planets are taking these ships and planes away. Or maybe it has something to do with the lost city of Atlantis, a legendary underwater city. But there are also more rational explanations, such as the fact that this area often has wild and unpredictable weather, with sudden storms and water spouts. For hundreds and hundreds of years, sailors have told stories about giant rogue waves that seem to come out of nowhere in the open ocean. It sounded like a tale in the past, but in the last 20 years, satellites have spotted these freak waves, some of them reaching over 100 feet tall. Storms from the Gulf of Mexico can hit the Bermuda Triangle area and create such rough and unpredictable waves. Scientists built a model of the USS Cyclops and put it in a wave simulator. They say that even a rogue wave 50 feet tall would be enough to flip over that ship. It had a flat bottom and was less stable and more likely to tip. There are also lots of hills and deep valleys on the ocean floor, which can be dangerous if a ship isn't navigating carefully. Sometimes things can go wrong with engines, communication systems, or other equipment. If a plane or ship has a mechanical problem far from land, it can be really hard to get help quickly, especially if rescue teams are far away. The Bermuda Triangle also has magnetic anomalies, so in some parts of it, the compass might point in the wrong direction. And then there are human mistakes, like misjudging distances, making wrong turns, or not listening carefully to directions. This is what happened to Flight 19, a group of planes that went missing. The leader of the flight, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, decided to fly into bad weather without all the equipment they needed. He was also tired, so it was really hard for him to make good decisions. Disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle don't really happen more often than in other parts of the Atlantic Ocean, where a lot of ships and planes travel. They just attract more attention and talks. You still won't find the Bermuda Triangle on any map, and it doesn't have official borders. So we might never be able to solve its mystery because we can't be sure it even exists. But maybe we need to be worried about another Bermuda Triangle, the one up in space. This space triangle doesn't make things completely disappear, but it messes with the equipment on the spacecraft, causing glitches and makes things stop working for a while. The Bermuda Triangle of Space, which is more officially known as the South Atlantic Anomaly, is a unique area above the Earth that stretches over parts of South America and Africa, from Chile all the way to Zimbabwe. It sits right where a part of Earth's magnetic shield is weaker than usual. When a satellite passes through this area, thousands of high-energy particles, especially protons, hit every square inch of it every second. To keep satellites safe from this radiation, space agencies often put them in sleep mode when they pass through the SAA. The Hubble Space Telescope passes through the SAA about 10 times a day and spends about 15% of its time in sleep mode because of this anomaly. Even astronauts on the International Space Station, ISS, which also travels near this zone, have to be careful about radiation. Parts of the ISS, like the kitchen and sleeping areas, have extra shielding to protect them. There's a stretch of water that even the most experienced explorers fear. No matter what season you choose to cross it in, you risk meeting face-to-face with waves that can reach as tall as the Hollywood sign. I'm talking about the Drake Passage, the waterway connecting the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, stretching from Cape Horn at South America's southernmost tip to Antarctica's South Shetland Islands. It's about as wide as the distance from London to Berlin and takes up to 48 hours to cross. Some sailors compare getting on the other side to going to the moon. That's how challenging it is. Even the man who discovered it, Sir Francis Drake, never sailed these waters because they seemed too dangerous to him and opted for a calmer, although longer, Strait of Magellan. The passage took the lives of around 20,000 sailors and over 800 ships. Tourists who want to see Antarctica cross the Drake Passage on a regular basis, although it's still often called the world's most terrifying ocean crossing. The Antarctic Peninsula, where travelers go, isn't really part of Antarctica itself. It sticks out and points towards South America like two fingers almost touching it. The water gets squeezed between these two land masses, making strong ocean currents. The passage is part of the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, the largest ocean current on Earth. The water rushes through the passage at a speed between 95 and 150 million cubic meters per second, which makes it rougher. And then there are winds that usually blow from west to east and are very strong between 40 and 60 degrees latitude. That's why those areas are called the Roaring Forties, Furious 50s, and Screaming 60s. Land slows down winds, which is why storms hitting Ireland and the UK get weaker as they move east. But Drake's latitude is the only place where winds can blow all around the Earth without being stopped by land. So they keep getting faster. These strong winds turn into huge waves that can hit ships really hard, normally around 13 to 16 feet tall. They're much higher than waves in the Atlantic. Drake Passage also has underwater mountains that you can't see. The huge current squeezes through this narrow passage and causes waves to crash against these mountains underwater. These internal waves create whirls that bring cold water up from the deep ocean. So it's not just rough on the surface, the water is wild all the way down. The first sailor managed to sail around Cape Horn and through the Drake Passage in 1616. It was a Dutch navigator, Willem Schouten, in 1616. But the most famous attempt to cross it was undertaken by Sir Ernest Henry Shackleton on his ship named Endurance. He and 27 of his men set off from South Georgia, aiming to reach Vassal Bay in Antarctica. But things didn't go as planned. On January 19, 1915, their ship got stuck in the ice. And by October, it began to sink. They camped on floating ice for 2 months before sailing lifeboats to a remote, icy place called Elephant Island. Shackleton and 5 men made a risky journey to South Georgia to get help. It took them 15 days to cross Drake Passage with hurricane winds. Finally, they arrived safely and organized a rescue for the rest of their crew. Scientists found the shipwreck of Endurance only in 2022, 10,000 feet below the water. In December of 2019, 6 fearless athletes decided to cross the Drake Passage by rowing a boat for the first time in history. It took them 12 days of non-stop rowing with a 90-minute rotation of rowers. They managed to do it, and it was probably the hardest possible way to cross the passage. The athletes mentioned it was cold, wet, and dirty, and the waves hit them like walls. The weather in the Drake Passage changes a lot, but ship captains can always see it coming and change their path. They will move the departure time to have a safety margin and not to get stuck in the middle of the passage in the worst possible conditions. Sometimes, the journey will be smooth and calm, and they call it Drake Lake. Other times, people on the ship will feel rough waves, which is called Drake Shake. Some experienced captains who often cross the passage say that the Drake Lake effect happens once in every 10 crossings, and they see the Drake Shake once or twice in every 10 journeys. A schooner or a kayak will probably not survive the journey among giant waves, but modest vessels and cruise ships have sturdy hulls and advanced stabilizing mechanisms. So, the journey isn't that dangerous anymore, but still, it's quite an adventure, especially if you're seasick. If you don't feel like risking it but want to travel from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean by water the fast way, the Panama Canal is waiting for you. People first started thinking about making a water path across Panama in the 16th century. Back then, a Spanish explorer found out that only a thin piece of land separated the two oceans. But it seemed impossible to build it because of the mountains and thick jungle, so the idea had to wait a couple of centuries. Finally, in 1880, France, led by the man who built the Suez Canal in Egypt, tried to make the canal. But the people who started the construction soon found out it was much harder than it looked on a map. The land in Panama was one of the toughest and most dangerous places to dig a big waterway. Workers had to literally move huge mountains in a jungle full of snakes, where it was really hot and rainy. During the wet season, heavy rain turned rivers into wild rapids and soaked the workers. Sometimes, they didn't see the sun for 2 weeks, and their clothes stayed wet all the time. Big rocks were falling, and tiny mosquitoes that carried malaria made people very sick. And then, an earthquake happened on top of everything. They were losing thousands of people. That's why France decided to abandon the project after 7 years. Then, the United States bought the French assets in the canal zone and finished it by 1914. It cost the US around $375 million. The 50-mile-long passage of water saves ships traveling between New York and San Francisco 7,872 miles. Around 14,000 ships use it every year and pay around $1.8 million in tolls. So it looks like it all paid off. Another challenging waterway in this part of the world is the Amazon River. It's around 4,300 miles long and flows through 3 countries with over 30 million people living in its basin. But there isn't a single bridge across it. The river has many marshes and soft soils, so engineers would need to build very long bridges and very deep foundations, which costs a lot of money. Building bridges over deep water is tough, but in other places in the world, engineers can use things like floating platforms to help. The river's path and water levels change a lot during the year. During the dry season from June to November, the river is usually 2 to 6 miles wide. But in the wet season from December to April, the river can become as wide as 30 miles. and the water level can rise by 50 feet. That's why they can't build floating bridges or pontoons. The riverbanks are made of soft dirt that moves and erodes with the seasons, and it makes things even harder. It would have to be an absolutely unique project to overcome all these challenges. Luckily, there's no pressing need for a bridge across the Amazon right now. The river mostly goes through areas that are sparsely populated, so there aren't so many major roads to be connected by bridges.
There's a ship drifting somewhere in the ocean without a crew. The last time someone saw it was over 50 years ago. Its story reminds of that of the Flying Dutchman, a ship that's bound to sail forever and bring disaster to whoever sees it at sea. At least the legend says so. Unlike the Flying Dutchman, the SS Bay Chimo was definitely real and built for a German company in Hamburg and began as an ordinary cargo ship. It was trading supplies between Hamburg and Sweden in the Baltic Sea starting from 1914. It had a strong steam engine and a hull made of steel. A few years later, it became British property. Then, in the 1920s, a Canadian company purchased it for around $18,000, a huge amount of money back then. The new owner, the Hudson's Bay Company, was actively using the ship for several years. They would often send it on voyages from its home port in Scotland to Siberia, Alaska, the Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. It also passed through the Panama Canal and even the Suez Canal, with fur pelts for sale on board. Sometimes it would also transport passengers. It had completed 9 successful voyages before this strip of good luck came to an end. Starting from the 1930s, SS Bay Chimo would have trouble with ice and storms. When it first got trapped in ice in October of 1931, some of the crew managed to escape to Alaska. 15 of 22 sailors decided to stay with their vessel and try to save it. They had furs and other valuable cargo worth around $58,000 aboard. The company sent them supplies to survive the winter. They set camp near the ship out of the hatches, tarpaulins, and other materials, and offloaded the cargo. At the end of November, a blizzard rushed through the area, and it seemed like it had taken the ship with it. The ice platform had survived, but the ship broke free. Some of the crew members were sure it had sunk. But soon after, they heard from one of the locals who had spotted their ship around 45 miles away from their camp. The crew moved on with their lives, and the ship started its journey as a runaway vessel. People would spot SS Bay Chimo once a year or so, all the way until 1965. It was mostly spotted off the coast of Alaska. A man going to Nome with his sled dog, along with prospectors, explorers, and treasure hunters, all claimed to have seen SS Bay Chimo. Someone tried to board it and take it to port, but ended up stranded on it for days because of horrible weather. Others got luckier and managed to take a whaleboat, some furniture, and other valuables from the vessel. Those who got close to the ship saw that it was damaged and missing the propeller. Still, it stayed afloat without a crew for at least 38 years and became the longest sailing ghost ship in history. In 2006, the Alaskan authorities started a project to solve the mystery of this ghost ship of the Arctic and finally find SS Bay Chimo, either still above or below the water. So far, the project has not been a success. SS Bay Chimo remains one of the estimated 4,000 ships that have disappeared off Alaskan shores. If the legend of the 17th century isn't lying, this ghost ship could be sailing somewhere along the Flying Dutchman. It belonged to the Dutch East India Company. Its captain managed to do the impossible for that time and sailed from Holland to Indonesia in only 3 months. They said he was flying over the sea, and some evil tongues explained that he had made a deal with evil forces to achieve that. Once the ship was sailing back home, its captain and crew disappeared without a trace. There are many versions of what happened to it. One of the first ones said it had tried to enter port at the Cape of Good Hope, got in a terrible storm, and sank as there was no captain to save it. Another legend says the captain had refused to obey the skies to let the ship sink during the storm. A scary life form then struck the boat and the crew, and it was condemned to forever wander without rest. Many sailors claim to have spotted the wandering Dutchman. The Duke of York, who is to become King of England, mentioned having seen it in Australian waters. Right after spotting the ship, the man who saw it first fell from the top of the mast and didn't survive. There were more encounters with this legendary ship up to the middle of the 20th century. Ships would nearly collide with it as the Flying Dutchman jumped out of the blue. Scientists have a more logical explanation for this mystery: Fata Morgana, not to be confused with Hakuna Matata. Now, when you're out at sea on a hot day and the air is all wavy, it feels like when you look at the road on a scorching summer day. That's because of something called atmospheric refraction. When light passes through different layers of air with different temperatures and densities, it bends and twists. Sometimes, under certain conditions, this bending of light can create really bizarre optical illusions over the ocean, like sightings of the Flying Dutchman. The Fata Morgana phenomenon can make distant objects appear distorted, stretched, or even lifted above the horizon. So you can see a ship far away, but because of the way the light is bending, it will look like it's floating above the water or even disappearing and reappearing. A Fata Morgana is most commonly seen in polar regions, especially over large sheets of ice that have a uniform low temperature. But you can see it anywhere, even in deserts and over lakes on hot days. The first stories about ghost ships go all the way back to ancient Greek and Roman mythology. One of the most famous ghost ships in history is the Mary Celeste. This brigantine was traveling from New York City to Genoa and was fully stocked with provisions, but missing a crew when it was discovered in the Atlantic Ocean in 1872. The crew's personal belongings were also there, completely undisturbed. The final entry in their log was made 10 days earlier. We still don't know what happened to its crew, and the ship has inspired many spooky stories and legends. The Lady Lovibond was another legendary schooner that is believed to have been wrecked off the coast of Kent in the middle of the 18th century. The story tells that the ship's captain, Simon Reed, had just got married and took his bride on board for a celebratory cruise, despite the superstition that it could bring bad luck. They were on their way to Portugal when the first mate, who is also in love with the captain's new wife, went mad because of jealousy, attacked another crew member, and then took over the wheel and steered the ship straight into the dreaded Goodwin Sands. No one aboard survived, and the schooner is said to reappear as a ghost vessel every 50 years. In present times, many vessels become abandoned and turned into ghost ships intentionally. There are thousands of them floating in U.S. rivers, lakes, channels, and coastal waters. Some people lose their boats in storms and other extreme weather. Others have to abandon their boats because maintaining them can cost 10% of the boat's price. Plus, docking a vessel can add up to several $1,000s every year. Most boats have been made of fiberglass, so an owner can't just recycle them as scrap metal. So, once they want to get rid of it, they often tie it to a dock and sneak away, or leave it floating far away from the shore, or just try to sink it. When ghost ships sink in shallow waters, they can cause damage to coral reefs, mangroves, marshlands, oyster habitats, and wetlands. Plus, they can collide with unsuspecting regular ships and cause real trouble. So, don't do that. Enough said.
If I asked you to name the most famous shipwreck of all time, you'd go with the Titanic, right? The Atlantic Ocean, the hope for new life, heartbreaking love stories. It had it all to become a blockbuster. But I guess you've never heard of SS Princess Alice that submerged in the sewage of the River Thames, taking between 600 and 700 lives with it. Life in 19th century Victorian London wasn't easy, especially for working class folks. Affordable public transport and bank holidays made it a bit easier. The people could escape to the coast on a train or pleasure boat, even if it was just for a day. Sheerness on the Isle of Sheppey in Kent started as a fort under Henry VIII and then grew into a bustling town with a dockyard. When they added a railway station in 1863, it became a prime destination for day trippers and holidaymakers. Seaside promenades, charming piers, and a whole bunch of fun stuff to do by the sea. It had it all. A bit inland along the River Thames, you had the Rocherville Gardens. These gardens had archery lawns, bowls, mazes, lakes, cliff walks, and even a floral bazaar. Plus, there was an aviary, a bear pit, and a skeleton of a lost whale that had taken a wrong turn in the Thames. Londoners of the late 19th century could hop on a train or cruise along the Thames by boat, and both options were pretty popular. But on the 3rd of September, 1878, way more people than usual opted for the boat. They chose it over the railroad after a passenger train had collided with goods wagons in Kent, taking the lives of 5 people. The river felt like a safer way to go. One of the ships available for the trip was the SS Princess Alice. The paddle steamer was first launched in 1865 on the west coast of Scotland. Its original name was the Bute, and it was used as a ferry for the passengers of the Weems Bay Railway Company. A couple of years later, it was sold and renamed after Queen Victoria's 3rd child. Then, it was sold again and got the nickname the Shah's Boat, as it transported the Shah of Persia up the Thames to Greenwich in 1873. The ship had gone through several alterations in its lifetime. It got new boilers and watertight bulkheads. The Board of Trade had inspected it and marked it safe. In the year of its final voyage, it was officially allowed to carry up to 936 passengers between London and Gravesend in calm water. On the day of the tragedy, Princess Alice was on what was called a moonlight trip downstream from Swan Pier near London Bridge to Sheerness, Kent and back. The trip wasn't expensive, so most of the passengers were from the working class. There was also a musical band aboard to keep the spirits up. The 3rd of September was a bright day, and many families were happy they could catch some final summer sun rays and enjoy fresh sea air. The then owner of the ship, the London Steamboat Company, had several vessels working on the route. The passengers were free to hop on and off different ships. At around 6:30 p.m., after a beautiful day in the open, the SS Princess Alice headed back to Swan Pier. No one kept official lists of passengers, so we'll never know exactly how many people were on board that evening. But they say the steamer was close to its full capacity. As it got darker and cooler, many families decided to stay inside the saloon or in their cabins below. Some stories from the steamer sound like fate. The captain of Princess Alice let his steerer stay at Gravesend and replaced him with one of the passengers. John Ayres was a sailor but had little experience at the Thames or with a vessel like Princess Alice. Alfred Thomas Merriman, a chef from East London, had been offered to work on the steamer at the last moment. He was 30 years old and a father of 4, so he couldn't say no to extra money. At around 7:40 p.m., he was standing on the deck by the saloon door. By that time, Princess Alice had passed Tripcock Point and entered Galleon's Reach. The passengers could see the North Woolwich Pier in the distance. Many of them planned to disembark at that stop. And that's when Merriman noticed a huge ship carrying coal. It was Bywell Castle. This vessel normally carried coal to Africa, but it had just been repainted at a dry dock. Bywell Castle was going to Newcastle to pick up some coal and transport it to Alexandria, Egypt. The ship's captain, Harrison, wasn't too familiar with these waters, so he called in Christopher Dix, a seasoned Thames River pilot, to lend a hand, even though he didn't have to. The ship had a fancy raised forward part below the deck, and Dix couldn't quite see what was in front of him. So, they had a sailor on lookout duty. As they set sail from Millwall at the speed of 5 knots, 5.7 miles per hour, they tried to stick to the middle of the river, but other boats had other plans. When they were approaching Galleon's Reach, Dix spotted Princess Alice's red port light, headed their way, but planning to pass on the right side. At the same time, Grinstead, the captain of Princess Alice, was going against the river's flow, trying to find the smooth waters on the south side. He adjusted his course, steering into Bywell Castle's path. Both crews realized they were headed for a collision. Dix tried to steer clear and even ordered reverse full speed on the engines, but it was too late. The Bywell Castle collided head-on with the Princess Alice, which was much smaller, weighing less than a third of the 890-ton coal-carrying collier. It sliced the passenger steamer in two. As Merriman remembered later, laughter on board immediately changed into screaming and panic. Some people rushed to the bridge for safety. Merriman hurried to the captain, asking what to do next. The captain's response was grim. "We are sinking fast. Do your best." The ends of the steamer went high into the air, and the middle just sank, taking passengers with it. Those unfortunate ones who were below deck were tragically trapped. The impact caused tons of untreated sewage to gush from outlets near the collision site. The water became a frothy mess of unprocessed waste with a horrible odor. It was potent enough to make even the most resilient sailors retch. Amid the chaos, passengers struggled for life in the contaminated water. They inhaled lungfuls of hazardous waste without knowing. The crew aboard the Bywell Castle sprang into action. They dropped ropes from their deck, urging Princess Alice's passengers to climb aboard. Anything that could float, from planks to barrels, was tossed into the water to serve as flotation devices for those in need. Other members of their team launched a lifeboat, saving 14 people. Nearby boats, moored along the riverbanks, joined the mission, plucking survivors from the water. Many of Princess Alice's passengers didn't know how to swim, and it was even trickier for ladies wearing long, heavy dresses. Merriman was among the lucky ones who could swim. He first held on to a piece of wreckage, and then, when others got to it, swam away and caught onto a rope hanging over the side of the Bywell Castle. They managed to save around 130 people this way. Another survivor was Robert Haynes, who played in the Princess Alice band. He was fond of ships and had noticed the Bywell Castle a couple of minutes before the collision. He chose not to follow the rest of the band, who went downstairs for a break, and that saved his life. Princess Alice's sister ship, Duke of Teck, arrived 10 minutes too late to assist with the rescue efforts. Only 2 people who had been below deck or in the saloon managed to survive the collision. We still don't know the total count of lives taken on that day, but it's somewhere between 650 and 700. And what makes this story even more tragic is that it has been mostly forgotten.
At the beginning of the 20th century, somewhere off the coast of West Africa, a German steamship was leaving the port. Suddenly, the weather got worse, and the vessel entered a thick fog. The sailors ran aground on a sandbank close to the shore. Luckily, no one was hurt, and they were even able to save their precious cargo. But the ship was stuck in the sand for good. And it was not alone there. Nearly the entire length of the western coast of Namibia is called Skeleton Coast. If the name sounds scary, that's because it is. This 976-mile-long beach line is among the most dangerous places on Earth. The local Bushman tribes believe that their supreme deity made this land when it was angry. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to set foot in Namibia in the 15th century. And yep, they didn't like Skeleton Coast either. Portuguese explorers thought this land presented the gates to the underworld. This is the place where the Namib Desert meets the Atlantic Ocean. It might be dangerous, but it's actually beautiful. Plus, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. If Skeleton Coast had a PR manager, they would quit on the first day on the job. The area is not exactly tourist-friendly because of its geography and history. Beneath the sand and the waves, there is a secret ocean currently lurking for unsuspecting sailors. It's called Benguela Current. It flows towards the north along the coast of southern Africa. This part of the Atlantic is rich in marine life, but the current's land neighbor isn't that happy with the deal. This arid climate created the Namib Desert, one of the driest regions on Earth. And that marine life I just mentioned? It's sharks. 11 species of them to be exact. And yes, the great white decides to pop by once in a while. So far, we've got a desert landscape, strong currents, and sharks. Not a place for a beachside resort, definitely. But if someone ends up on Skeleton Coast, will they know they're in danger? Don't worry, they will. The beach is littered with wrecks of all sizes and shapes. If you remember that German ship I mentioned in the very beginning, its massive and rusted stern is now sticking out from the desert sand. There are some 500 wrecks in total scattered along the coast, and it's a mixed crowd, from Portuguese galleons centuries old to ships that ran ashore here in the 21st century. A modern fishing ship called Zela India managed to slip from its tow rope in 2008 and ended up on Skeleton Coast. Okay, it didn't escape on its own, it had some help from the elements, but it's better to be a tourist attraction on a beach than to be broken up for scrap. That's where the trawler was originally going, poor thing. Skeleton Coast's most famous inhabitant, to call it such a place, is the wreck of the Dunedin Star. The British cargo liner ran aground here in 1942. The massive rescue operation that followed reveals why it's so dangerous for sailors to end up here. The rescuers managed to save all of the crew and passengers, but at a heavy price. An aircraft and a tugboat were lost in the process. It took the last of the rescuers a full 2 months to return home to Cape Town. Why, you might wonder? One look at the map of the region reveals the reason. It's an endless sea of yellow, which is the sand. There are so few roads here, so Skeleton Coast is hard to reach by land. There are also legal obstacles. You need a special permit to drive into the area. But the skeletons in the name of the area don't only refer to ships, they also stand for animal bones. Most of these belong to whales and seals. Many animals have adapted to the area, so lions and hyenas roam the coastline in search of a meal. Yeah, now there are hungry lions as well, as if those sharks weren't enough. Other animals with a temporary residence on Skeleton Coast include elephants, cheetahs, leopards, and giraffes. In 1971, the Namibian authorities established a national park here, but except for surfers, after an adrenaline rush, they don't get many visitors. You can understand why. The Namib Desert is the oldest desert in the world, and it's not very tourist-friendly either. Those who travel to the region should pack sunscreen and a warm winter jacket. A weird combo, right? Well, not so much when you think that during the day, temperatures soar over 110 degrees Fahrenheit. At night, the air temperature drops below freezing. What a climate roller coaster! And that's not the final danger. Yep, there's more. Remember how that German ship got lost in thick fog? Yeah, it wasn't a one-off event. Because of the region's climate, fog shows up frequently. Sailors should cover their ears now, but this fog is actually good for wildlife. This is their only source of water in the Namib Desert. Reptiles and mammals have adapted to the harsh climate. They use as little water as possible. Shifting sands, thick fog, strong currents, lions, and sharks. Not the stuff you would put in a tourist booklet, but Skeleton Coast isn't the only beach on Earth you wouldn't want to spend your vacation on. I will take you to Cape Tribulation in Australia. The area covers some 48 square miles in the northwestern part of the continent. And no, the area is not as dry as Skeleton Coast. It's part of the Daintree rainforest. You could say that here, it is the rainforest, not the desert that meets the ocean. The beach at Cape Tribulation is straight from a postcard. But looks can be deceiving. Australia? Probably sharks. No, crocodiles are out here to get you if you decide to go for a dip in the sea. There are saltwater crocodiles that the locals call salties. Well, that's a cute nickname for such a dangerous reptile. And it's not just that. The wildlife seems to have a beef with visitors. From October to June, the waters around Cape Tribulation are full of box jellyfish. Their venom affects the human cardiovascular system. When touched by a jellyfish out at sea, swimmers won't have enough time to reach land for help. Vinegar helps neutralize the sting, so you might want to keep a spare bottle in your luggage. Crocodiles and jellyfish sound dangerous, but there's one more animal you should look after. It's the wild boar. It might sound funny, but you won't laugh when you're being chased by one of these across the beach. 21 million wild boars live in Australia. They're mostly active at night, making it even more dangerous if they charge at you. The best defense is running in circles. Wild boars can't cut corners well. That's probably why we don't see many of them taking up careers as race drivers. Cape Tribulation has one last danger installed for you, and it's not an animal. Out here, even the trees are plotting against visitors. The stinging tree got its name for a reason. If you try to pick one of its beautiful red berries, it'll fight back. Its prickles are like tiny glass shards. The less than pleasant effect on your skin will last for a month. Then there is this wait a while bush. Who keeps naming them like this? This long vine has spikes that grab hold and just don't let go. They are so strong they can pull a human off a horse. You'll have to wait for someone to come by and save you from this thorny grabber. If you are about to cross this Australian beach from the vacation list, hold on for a second. Tourism is booming here. The local authorities have restricted access to all of the danger zones. Visitors go swimming in dreamy water holes that are surrounded by lush vegetation. There are even ropes to swing from. Now, that's a beach you can finally relax on.
Strange things occur in the cold waters of Antarctica. One of these things happened to a ship called Jenny. It was a small schooner whose history began in 1822. The boat and its crew set sail and disappeared a year later. For 18 years, the ship was considered sunk. People forgot about it, but in 1840, the vessel reminded the world of itself. That year, the whaling ship Hope sailed through the Drake Channel in Antarctica. The crew members noticed a ship among icebergs. It was the schooner Jenny. It was floating slowly in the dark, with no signs of life. The captain of the Hope, Mr. Brighton, gave the order to approach the mysterious vessel. They thought it was some creepy ghost ship, but as they came closer, they noticed crew members on the deck. The sailors of the Hope called out to them, but received no answer. This time, it became clear that something terrible had happened to the Jenny. When Brighton boarded, he realized that the Jenny crew members weren't missing. They were here. Frozen people stood like statues. Brighton went down to the lower deck and found the captain. He was sitting frozen at the table, holding a pen. Brighton looked at the logbook. The last record was made on May 4th, 1823. The captain wrote that he was the only living member of the crew. They spent 71 days without food. It seemed that the ship got lost in the sea because its captain went off course or sailed into an iceberg, but no one knew for sure. After that, nobody ever saw the Jenny again. According to rumors, the crew of the Hope abandoned the frozen ship and left it to drift in the cold waters. According to other rumors, this whole story is fiction. The story of the Jenny was described in a German magazine in the middle of the 19th century. Still, there was no further evidence of the ship's existence. Already in our time, Cambridge University decided to explore the case of the Jenny. The researchers discovered that one of the crew members of the Hope, who didn't disclose his name, told someone the legend of the frozen ship. Someone shared the story with another guy, and it was published in a German magazine called Globus. And that's all. There was no other evidence. One of the most famous ghost ships was the Mary Celeste, and there's no doubt about its existence. The history of this vessel was documented in court. People wrote about it in newspapers, but the most exciting thing is that the ship continued to be used even after 10 people disappeared from its deck. The history of the Mary Celeste began in Canada in 1861. When it was first built, the ship was called the Amazon. It changed captains several times, and it also hit some rocks. The boat was sold, bought, then sold again, repaired, and sailed under the name Mary Celeste. In 1872, it had a new captain, Benjamin Briggs. He was a decent, brave man with a lot of experience in navigation. He had a beloved wife, a daughter, and a son. When he went on his last voyage, he took his wife and daughter with him, and his son stayed in America. In November of 1872, the Mary Celeste sailed from the port in New York with 10 people on board and disappeared. 8 days later, another ship, the Dei Gratia, also left New York and followed the same route. Dei Gratia's captain, David Morehouse, noticed the Mary Celeste and immediately realized something was wrong. The ship was moving too freely, as if no one was controlling it. The captain tried to contact the crew members, but no one answered him. Then, together with other sailors, he climbed aboard the Mary Celeste. The ship was in good condition. There was no damage. The hold was slightly filled with water, but it could be easily pumped out. Everything seemed fine, but one lifeboat was missing. The crew members' valuables were in their cabins. The cargo was in the hold. The supplies of water and food were untouched. Judging by the records in the logbook, the ship was caught in a storm, but it was not too strong. Other ships also sailed through this storm, but nothing bad happened to them. The last record was dated November 25th, and it claimed that everything was fine. The sails of the Mary Celeste were slightly damaged, but perhaps it happened after the crew had disappeared. The whole ship was in excellent condition, but what made the people leave it? Part of the crew of the Dei Gratia stayed on board the Mary Celeste to bring it to dry land. Everything went well. They delivered the ship to the closest port. Next, the captain of the Dei Gratia appeared before the court and told about what had happened. However, the prosecutor and the judge didn't want to believe in the story of the Mary Celeste. They were sure the captain got rid of the ship's crew to get money for its cargo. According to the maritime laws of that time, if you found a ghost ship with valuable cargo, then a substantial part of this cargo belonged to you. So, many people thought that David Morehouse decided to earn some money. This version seemed to be more valid than the one about the mysterious disappearance of 10 people. Fortunately, no one accused the captain of committing a crime. They thanked him for his service and gave him a monetary reward. However, his reputation was damaged, which greatly affected his career, as many believed he attacked the crew of the Mary Celeste. But even after this terrible case, trial, and investigation, the story was not over. The Mary Celeste was still an expensive and efficient vessel. It sailed several times, but then one captain crashed it into the reefs to get insurance. The court revealed this deception and accused the captain of intentional property damage. The story of the Mary Celeste became famous all over the world. People began to build their theories, realistic and not. Someone believed the ship had sailed through the Bermuda Triangle, but this version was quickly refuted, as the route of the Mary Celeste passed thousands of miles away from the Bermuda region. Did the Kraken or another giant monster attack the ship? Nope. Since the boat was found in almost perfect condition, there were no signs of a struggle. One of the most popular versions was that the crew of the Mary Celeste stole some valuable cargo and sailed to Spain on the rescue boat. However, those who knew Captain Benjamin Briggs said he was a good, honest man. Besides, he had a son in New York, and Briggs would never leave him. A more thorough investigation revealed that a series of accidental circumstances could have caused the disappearance of the ship's crew. Before its last voyage, the vessel delivered coal. Perhaps the pump intended for pumping water got clogged with coal after that, and when the ship got into a storm, the hold filled with water and the pump broke. The captain couldn't understand the amount of water because numerous barrels in the cargo hold blocked the view. Benjamin Briggs assumed it was dangerous to stay on the ship during a storm, so he evacuated with the passengers on a lifeboat. Perhaps they were close to land and decided to sail there, but the storm intensified and overturned the boat. Also, one record in the log journal said that the chronometer was faulty. It was a device that helped to determine your location at sea using longitude. Briggs got lost and didn't know which way to sail. The storm was strong, and he couldn't determine whether the ship would sink. Perhaps Briggs decided to leave the ship in a rescue boat when he saw the coast of the Azores. The uniqueness of this ghost ship case is that, unlike many others, you can investigate it yourself. There's a lot of information about the Mary Celeste on the internet. There are documentaries and research articles. Perhaps you'll be able to notice something that others haven't seen and solve the mystery of the disappearance of 10 people. The movie Jaws came out in 1975, and since then, people have been terrified of sharks. Some people fear seeing a great white's head come out of their showers, not to mention the fear of running into one at your local pool. Of course, none of this is actually possible, but some other scary shark stuff is. Like, yes, sharks can attack boats. They probably won't sink one. It depends on the size of the shark and the size of the boat. Today, we're diving deep into the facts and myths about the sea's biggest predator. It was the year 1953. On a typical July morning, two fishers set out on their daily lobster harvest. They took their white-hulled dory out to sea off the coast of Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia, Canada. Since it was the lobster season, the sea was dotted with several dories spread out across the water. But that day, something strange happened. As soon as they put the dory at sea, they noticed a large dorsal fin chasing after their boat. They were surprised to see that the shark would follow their boat's every move. For an entire week, they took out their white dory from the harbor, and the shark followed them around. Until one morning, as the men were alone at sea, the shark charged at full speed at the boat and smashed a 7-inch hole in its bottom. The boat turned over, and both men fell into the water. The shark didn't come after the men, though. Instead, it swam away and disappeared for good. To clarify, a dory is a small, fragile boat usually measuring 16 to 23 feet long. So how long did that shark need to be in order to sink it? Well, as soon as the boat was retrieved from the ocean, researchers found something interesting. One of the shark's teeth was found stuck in the hull. According to Harvard experts that analyzed the tooth, it most certainly belonged to a 12-foot white shark that weighed around 1,200 pounds. One thing intrigues scientists a whole lot. The great white didn't seem to be interested in the man aboard, but rather in the boat itself. The question is, why? Some people suppose that this great white followed the dory around because it was white, and the animal probably thought it was some big white mammal. It's not the first boat a shark has attacked. You see, sharks don't attempt to sink boats because they're mean and evil. Rather, it's due to murky waters and hard materials that make them mistake inanimate objects for their usual lunch menu. But that's not what we've learned from popular culture. In Jaws, the protagonist shark managed to poke several holes in the orca as it rammed the boat. The orca was a Nova Scotia-style fishing boat made out of wood planks. It wasn't a huge boat, so it seemed plausible that a great white could ram it. But, according to Mythbusters, that's very far from the truth. A great white swimming at its maximum speed wouldn't be able to take down a medium-sized fishing vessel. The same goes for bigger boats. Some bull sharks or great whites can turn over smaller vessels, though, like kayaks or small boats. If this happens, it's most likely because they think it's a sea mammal and nudge it before taking the first bite. No scientist can say for sure why they do this, only that it's usually a misunderstanding on behalf of the animal. The Shark Research Committee, a nonprofit scientific research organization, has documented a lot of shark attacks on inanimate objects and is trying to answer that question more thoroughly. So far, they've observed several attacks on objects such as crab trap buoys and inflatable float bags. The website has also registered 2 famous attacks on boats. The first one happened in 1959, and a shark left a tooth on the hull of a boat. Researchers later identified it as belonging to a 12-foot great white. The report of the other attack, which happened in 1989, claims that a boat was circled by a great white before the animal swam at the vessel at full speed and hit the boat several times. Of course, those who suffer the most from shark attacks and encounters aren't boats. It's surfers. As far as we know, surfers look like giant wobbly seals from the shark's perspective. According to the Shark Research Committee, there have been 41 confirmed shark attacks on surfers on the west coast of North America over the course of the last century. So, should we be so afraid of sharks after all? Let's learn more about these magnificent sea creatures. Off the top of your head, how many shark species can you name? 4, 8, 10? Well, there are over 500 species of sharks swimming in the ocean. They vary from tiny specimens, about the size of a human hand, to up to 39-foot-long creatures. The largest species of shark are actually not great whites, but whale sharks. And even those are small compared to the great megalodon. This ancient creature that lived around 20 million years ago reached an unimaginable length of 60 feet. By comparison, that's the same as 2 to 3 buses placed one after another. I wouldn't swim in megalodon-infested waters even if you dared me, that's for sure. We know that sharks are very good hunters, but why is that so? Their bodies seem to have been strategically built for speed. Instead of having a bone skeleton, like us humans, sharks have a cartilage skeleton, which makes them much lighter and also super fast swimmers. Each species of shark hunts depending on its nutritional needs. So, shark species that grow to an average of 3 feet have a diet based on fish. The ones that grow bigger start feeding off of bigger sea animals, such as sea lions and seals. Throughout their lives, some species of shark can shed over 30,000 teeth. Unlike humans, who are born with a set number of teeth in their jaws, sharks have an apparently limitless supply. In their defense, they do lose teeth pretty easily, as they can easily get stuck in their prey, for example. They also have multiple rows of teeth. The jaws of a great white can contain up to 7 rows of teeth, and can grow to be more than 6 inches long. And since we're speaking of great whites, the most feared shark species roaming the oceans, this is ray. Ray is an adult white shark. He can swim up to 50 miles a day, so he needs a lot of fat in order to keep his body functioning. Funny thing about Ray, when he opens his jaws to hunt, his eyes roll back together with his head, so his sight is hindered when he's taking a bite. Now, he does like it when the water is murky and underwater visibility is low. That's because it makes it harder for his prey to spot him coming. These conditions can make it easier for him to grab that yummy seal. But this can also make it easy for him to mistake a random boat for lunch and end up scaring some humans. Some Hollywood movies love to portray sharks as having superpowers. Although they're not innately cruel, one species of shark does have something that can be considered bizarre. Hammerhead sharks, one of the most dangerous species of sharks, have a sort of sixth sense. Inside their heads, they have electroreceptor organs called ampullae of Lorenzini. These organs allow sharks to detect the electromagnetic fields of all living things in the ocean. This ups their hunting abilities to another level. They can even find prey hidden in the sand because they sense its electromagnetic field. You should know one thing. If a shark lives in a balanced ecosystem, it won't feel the need to attack unknown things. These animals are curious, though, so maybe we should cut them some slack when they bite a piece off a random boat. They said it was the most technologically advanced ship. They said it was unsinkable, and when it sank, they made a movie about it. These were the main reasons why the Titanic disaster became world famous. But unfortunately, this is not the only large-scale shipwreck. And sadly, there have been cases much worse than the tragedy of the Titanic. One of them occurred on April 27, 1865. The Sultana steamboat carried passengers and cargo daily between St. Louis and New Orleans. It was a pretty large wooden boat with 3 decks and was 260 feet long and 70 feet wide, almost twice the size of a basketball court. The ship could carry about 350 passengers. But on that unfortunate day, more than 2,000 people were on it. On April 23rd, she was making a routine voyage from New Orleans when it broke down. Something was wrong with the boiler, so the vessel docked in Vicksburg for repairs. At the port, the ship's captain, James Cass Mason, found out about an excellent opportunity to earn a lot of money. All he needed to do was to transfer a large group of former prisoners to the north. The captain agreed to do it, but the problem was that the boiler required a lot of time to repair. Mason was afraid that his competitors would take the job, so he decided to sail despite the malfunction the ship had. He patched up the holes in the boiler instead of a big repair and invited all the ex-prisoners on board. So, there was a broken boiler, an excess number of passengers, a lack of lifeboats, and not the best river conditions. Also, the captain refused to send the ex-prisoners to the hold, so they were all with ordinary passengers. There were strong chances for a shipwreck, but the greedy desire to earn more money was stronger. The Sultana went on a voyage and sailed up the river for 2 days. At this time, one of the biggest Mississippi floods in history began. The river overflowed its shores because of the flood, with the water level rising several feet. All the trees on the shore disappeared, and only the tops were sticking out of the water. The ship sailed opposite this powerful current, making the boiler work too hard. On the evening of April 26th, the Sultana arrived in Memphis, Tennessee, and they loaded even more, 120 tons of sugar and 200 passengers. She got incredibly heavy. Around midnight, the ship continued its dangerous journey. The captain sailed to barges to load a shipment of coal. At 1 a.m., the vessel left the barge. At 2 a.m., the broken boiler, unable to withstand the load, suddenly exploded. The Sultana was just 7 miles north of Memphis. Few people survived that day. The problem was that passengers trying to escape from the fire jumped into a cold river with a strong current. The Sultana disaster is considered the most tragic shipwreck in the history of the United States. The exact number of those who didn't survive is still unknown. According to various sources, this number was from 961 to 1,800 people. Don't be surprised that almost no one knows this story. There were many more survivors in the Titanic tragedy, and everybody heard about it. But the Sultana sank during one high-profile event. 12 days before the shipwreck, the country lost Abraham Lincoln. People hadn't yet recovered from this news, so no one paid much attention to the tragedy of the Sultana. Many catastrophes happened quite recently by historical standards. One of them occurred in 2002. The ferry La Jula was a Senegalese vessel. The ferry sailed twice a week, mainly along the coast of Dakar, carrying passengers who traded mango and palm oil. It made daily voyages and never faced severe problems thanks to modern rescue equipment and good repair service. But one day, the ship's crew discovered a malfunction and sent the boat to port. For almost a year, La Jula was in a non-working condition, awaiting repairs. But it didn't get high-quality service. After poor maintenance, the ferry set off on its last voyage. On September 26, 2002, La Jula sailed between southern Senegal and Dakar, and at 11 p.m. headed toward Gambia, where a strong storm began. The wind raised high waves, but this wasn't critical for the large passenger ship unless the number of people on board didn't exceed the established norm. La Jula was supposed to carry about 500 passengers, but had many more people that day. Too many passengers, poor repairs, and a strong storm caused severe problems for the ship. But the main factor in the shipwreck was that La Jula was only built for sailing in coastal waters, but that day, it sailed far from the shore. Big waves started rocking the boat, and at some point, it just turned upside down. The ship's deck went underwater, and its lower part stuck above the surface like an iceberg. All the passengers sitting in cabins fell on the ceiling and lost their orientation in space. There were no holes or damage in the ship's hull, and water flooded the lower decks for a long time. The vessel stood in a twisted position for several hours. Then, the boat began to sink when the water seeped through the deck and hold. The ocean was warm, but no one came to save the passengers. People had to wait almost 4 days to be rescued. Unfortunately, only a few managed to survive. The Philippines is a very dangerous area for ships. This place consists of several thousand islands and a vast area with shallow water. Ships can run aground and damage the hull with reefs and pitfalls. On September 20th, 1987, one of the most terrible disasters in navigation history occurred there. A Philippine passenger ferry called Dona Paz left one of the islands and sailed toward Manila. The sun was shining, the ocean was calm, and the visibility was good. But for some reason, the crew members didn't notice how the tanker Vector was approaching them. The two ships collided at low speed. The collision wasn't strong, but the problem was that the Vector had tons of oil on board, and the Dona Paz crashed into the cargo hold where that oil was stored. So it spilled all over the ocean, and then a spark slipped through. Not only did the two ships catch fire, but also filled with water. Both ships sank in a matter of seconds. Only a few dozen people survived that disaster. On September 27, 1854, the passenger ship Arctic sailed from Liverpool to New York. The fog came rolling down, and visibility got really bad. Another boat appeared out of the thick white haze, the French steamer Vesta. The ships were close enough to each other that a collision was inevitable. The French vessel was smaller, so it seemed to the Arctic's captain that Vesta had received a lot of damage. And while he was staring at the other ship, his boat got quickly filled with water. The captain gave the order to sail to the shore as fast as possible, but the ship's engines stopped working because of the flood. Then the ship's crew started to lower lifeboats with women and kids. Still, when rescuers found lifeboats with people, it turned out that only 87 out of 400 people survived, 65 crew members and 22 passengers. Surprisingly, there were only grown men among them. The ship's captain survived by clinging to the wreckage. All newspapers wrote about this story as one of the most terrible and shameful tragedies in navigation history. The survivors were criticized because they didn't save women and kids, and the crew members were accused of violating the law, since the safety of passengers should be higher than the safety of sailors. But despite this, none of them were brought to responsibility. Unfortunately, shipwrecks still occur to this day, but fortunately, there are fewer of them than before, thanks to modern navigation systems and radar. But no technology can guarantee there won't be a super strong storm or any other emergency that no one can foresee.
Have you ever wondered how containers on a cargo ship remain intact throughout the whole journey? Let me answer this question and tell you about other cool ship facts. Meet Unsinkable Sam. Sam's goal was to prove the saying, "Cats have 9 lives." This animal survived 3 ships sinking. He was originally named Oscar, but got nicknamed Unsinkable Sam. You probably get why. The first time the ship he was traveling on sank, Oscar was found by the crew of another ship when he was floating on board. He remained on that ship for a couple of months, but then the vessel also sank in 1941. The cat was then saved by another ship. The crew there had heard the story of the animal and called him Unsinkable Sam. His marine journey ended when the crew sent him back to the UK. The story checks out, but some people question whether it's true. Sailors had to spend months on their ships, so it was natural that they told strange stories or believed in superstitions. One thing is clear though, sailors loved cats and welcomed them on their ships. Besides being cute floofs, cats were very effective in terms of hunting rodents. You can take it as you wish, a hoax or a true story. I'm leaving Sam in the 40s and returning to the present day. How come ships have internet in the middle of nowhere? Since there are no towers or cables around, satellite connection steps in. Satellite services provide direct internet connection via hardware installed on the ship. This hardware is a must. It's not as cheap as our home Wi-Fi. The installation charges for the entire ship's internet are around $600. And the price of the hardware depends on such things as the size of the ship and how much internet it's going to use. This is not the only option. Wireless devices are also popular, yet they can access the internet only when they're close to ports or other places where networks are available. The Titanic was a giant, luxurious hotel for some of its passengers. You may have heard that it had lots of amenities you could use, even its own newspaper. Yep, it was called the Atlantic Daily Bulletin. It was published on the ship. The paper had news articles, advertisements, and the latest stock prices. It also mentions daily menus, horse racing results, and society gossip. Where ships get fuel is also a good question. There aren't fuel stations floating in the ocean. Bunkering is the answer. Ships use different kinds of oil for different purposes. Bunkering is loading fuel onto a ship. This process takes place at ports. The storage and provision of the ship fuels can be made by tankers. Currently, Singapore is the largest bunkering port in the world. Imagine you're on a cruise ship and you need to use the toilet. What happens after you flush? The sewage goes to a place called an onboard treatment plant. There, the waste is filtered. Then it moves to another chamber. This chamber cleans the waste and sterilizes it. Lastly, the waste is dumped into the ocean when it's clean enough. Those substances that don't go through the filter are kept on the ship. A ship gets rid of them when it arrives at a port. Speaking of toilets, I must mention that wastewater is color-coded on cruise ships. Every person on a cruise uses 40 to 50 gallons of water each day. That's why there might be too much wastewater. So, over the years, some solutions have been found to reduce this amount. Water is coded as black and gray. Black water goes from toilets, and gray water comes from the laundry, showers, kitchens, etc. Basically, it's thought that gray water waste is cleaner than black water. Why are ships so slow? It's related to power. Water has a drag force, and it affects ships. Imagine yourself swimming in the ocean. It takes effort to swim forward because of the water resistance. A smaller ship wouldn't need that much power to push itself forward. But huge cruise ships need a lot of power because they're heavier. If you, let's say, put a 7,000-ton ship in the water, it will displace 7,000 tons of water. When such a ship goes forward, it pushes some of the displaced water ahead of itself. This results in a bow wave, which carries some kinetic energy away. We talked about cruise ships and cargo ships mainly. What about solo travelers? Laura Decker became the youngest person to circumnavigate the world on her own. She set out in 2012, and 518 days later, she completed her voyage. She had a 40-foot-long ketch named Guppy. She was 14 when she started the journey. You can think of loading containers on a cargo ship as playing Tetris, but you can't start over when the game is over. That would cost you thousands of dollars. Anyway, the logic is the same. The first layer should be strong enough to support the rest. The bottom containers, or first tier, if you want to sound more like a pro, are secured with twist locks. This is an automatic locking mechanism to keep the upper level containers locked. These locks are attached when a unit is being lifted from the pier onto a cargo ship. They're similar to Lego pins. All containers have these lock systems, and you basically mount them on top of each other. Plus, many cargo ships have vertical slots made of long metal rails. They're like cells that hold containers and prevent them from moving and falling into the deep water. How do they unlock the mechanism? There's a special rod to do it. In the past, cargo ships were allowed to only stack 5 to 6 containers on top of one another. With the appearance of the lock mechanism, it's possible to make 10 to 12 layers. Still, hundreds of containers get lost each year because of harsh weather conditions, or simply because of the negligence of people who load them. According to some data, more than 3,100 containers were lost in 2020 to 2021. The number was only 779 in the previous year. This means an almost 400% increase. Apparently, there are hidden passageways and secret doors on cruise ships. The ship's staff get from one place to another without using the stairs and doors that passengers use. There's a network of corridors and stairs all around the ship only the crew members know about. These secret doors can blend in with the walls. This way, they become undetected by those who don't know there's a door there. Gigantic cruise ships are basically floating pieces of metal. The walls of the cruise ship cabins are magnetic. That's why, when on a cruise, you can buy travel-themed fridge magnets and use them to decorate your cabin. The Seawise Giant is the largest ship in history. It was built between 1974 and 1979. Its length was greater than the height of the Eiffel Tower. The vessel sunk in 1988, but was later retrieved and put into service. What about the smallest ship in the world? Researchers in the Netherlands have built the world's smallest vessel. It's about 1/100th of an inch long. To put it in perspective, this is about 1/3 the width of a strand of your hair. They built it with the help of a 3D printer. Do you know that some people have residences on ships? Yes, sounds like a dream, if you like the water, of course. Residents permanently live on a ship as it travels the world. MS The World is an example of a private residential cruise ship. The residents can live on board as the liner travels to exotic destinations. They can stay there full-time or come back periodically during the year. Since the UK is an island nation, things it imports have to be delivered by sea or by cargo planes. The number might surprise you. 90% of everything they buy arrives at their ports by sea. Do you know any other cool marine facts? Comment below.
Ships have been around for at least 6,000 years, dating back to ancient Egypt. In the beginning, they were used for trading and exploring. Ships as an attraction became a thing only a bit over 100 years ago, but the first cruise ship wasn't the infamous Titanic as you might think. The first cruise ship that took passengers on a voyage was a German ship called Prinzessin Victoria Louise back in 1900, and it served for 6 years. Modern ships are of course more advanced, but they still have a limited lifespan. They usually serve for about 30 years. A ship much older than that isn't considered safe and stable anymore due to the metal fatigue, most often of the ship's hull. After ships finish their lifespan, they retire and get sent to a shipyard, where they get scrapped. Most famous and beloved ships have a better fate. They get turned into hotels and attractions. Since ships are extremely expensive to build, no wonder that they are so huge, often as long as 3 football fields and as tall as 20-story building. The companies want to accommodate as many passengers as possible, because it means better profits. Also, cruise ship cabins are built separately from the ship, because otherwise there wouldn't be enough space for the construction. They're added to the vessel already in the shipyard, where the ship is put together. Quite often, different parts of the ship are even built by different companies. Voyages are fun, but if you need to get somewhere fast, cruise ships shouldn't be your first choice, because they are very slow. On average, they travel at the speed of just 23 miles per hour. Ships travel way slower than cars and planes, because they move huge amounts of water. Move on the ground and you're fast. Now step in a swimming pool and try to run there. It'll be way harder for you to do, and you'll be way slower, barely moving through. Now keep in mind that you are much smaller than a ship. As we've seen, ships are massive. When you put something in the water, it displaces the amount of water that is equivalent to its weight. So a ship displaces thousands of tons of water and then pushes through it. That's why they are slow. Such huge ships sure have big anchors. An average anchor weighs like 4 grown-up elephants. The crew members try to avoid dropping the anchor when it's possible, because such a massive thing can severely harm the ecosystems at the bottom of the sea. When boarding a ship, the first thing we have to notice is lifeboats. The Titanic was designed to carry 64 lifeboats, but it only had 20 of them. The rest is history, but ever since what happened to the Titanic, ships are required to have safety equipment to accommodate 125% of the people on the ship. So, it's even more than required, just to be on a safe side. But here is the story. In 1915, 3 years after the Titanic sank, a cruise ship called SS Eastland, which was loaded with extra lifeboats and rafts, sank under the heavy weight of all that extra equipment. But don't worry, it never happened again. Even though modern cruise ships are very safe, it's good to be prepared. So let's take a look inside one of those lifeboats. Firstly, they are orange in color, and it's not just some orange. This one has a special name, International Bright Orange. Of course, there is a good reason to use it, better visibility. If we take a look at the color wheel, orange is the exact opposite of blue, meaning that it's most contrasting to it. So, in between the sea and the sky, which usually appear blue, an orange boat will be the most visible. Life jackets and life preservers are orange for the same reason, as you might have guessed. But International Bright Orange only became a requirement in 1962. Before that, the life jackets were mostly white. For example, look at those life jackets. These are the ones that were used by the passengers on the Titanic. But white isn't a good choice at all. It's particularly hard to spot a white life jacket and a white lifeboat on a white-capped sea. All the equipment inside the lifeboats must meet international requirements and must be kept in good condition. So, the crew members are required to do maintenance every 3 months to avoid any rupture and damage of the lifeboats and everything in them. Firstly, there is a fresh water and food ration, for obvious reasons. Then there is a portable compass, which helps determine the direction in which to steer it. The next thing is a signaling mirror. It's a device that allows the light to attract the attention of passing ships. A less expected thing inside is an embarkation ladder, a rope ladder with wooden or metal steps that are used to ascend or descend from one ship to another. And finally, there is a first aid kit. All cruise ships pick up stranded sailors and fishermen, and that happens quite often. So don't be surprised if your cruise ship stops in the middle of the sea to pick someone up. It's common practice. Ships can even change their course to pick up some stranded sailors if they get a distress call. Have you noticed that all ships, both cruise ships and container ships, always have the bottom of the hull painted red? Yes, it's a thing. In early times, when ships were mostly made of wood, sailors were painting the hulls with copper paint, because it was protecting the vessel from wood-eating worms, barnacles, and seaweed. The copper was the ingredient that was giving the paint that color. All this muck wasn't only impairing the vessel's structure, but was also increasing the drag, preventing the ships from moving as fast as they could have. So, protective paint is important to reduce the number of barnacles that get accumulated. These days, of course, hull-protecting ingredients can be added to any kind of paint, and there is no practical need to paint the bottom of the hull red, but it's still being done to honor the old tradition. Still, even the most modern paint doesn't allow to completely avoid the growth of barnacles on the hull. Also, most ports don't even allow you to scrape those off the hull once you dock. That's because the ships that arrive from faraway waters can bring along non-native species of seaweed and other organisms which can severely harm the local ecosystem. Crew members sleep in that lower part of the ship, the underwater one. It's called a B-deck, and there are dorm-style rooms in the hull just for the crew members. Also, you might have noticed that there are numbers painted vertically on the side of the hull. The red background helps them stand out more, which is important since those numbers are crucial. They help you understand how much load the ship is carrying. The more weight there is on board, the lower in the water the vessel will sit. If you watched movies about pirates or heard sailors talk, you might have noticed that the ships are referred to as she and often have female names. It is an old tradition to consider a ship as a female figure, most often a mother or a female deity that is guiding and protecting the crew. It is also believed that the name of the ship brings good luck to the ship, as well as to the crew and the passengers. People who spend their lives in the sea have many superstitions regarding boats. Finding a cat aboard is considered good luck, even if the cat is black. They are very handy because they hunt mice, therefore keeping the ship clean and safe. But bananas aboard is a no-no. It's especially common among fishermen. They believe that if there are bananas in the boat, the fish won't.
No matter what happens, don't stop! We almost got it! Two treasure seekers are digging frozen ground in a cornfield at night. It's raining hard, lightning is flashing, but these two guys keep working. And now the shovel hits something solid. No way! A treasure chest! They start digging faster and find a piece of a ship's engine. What the? Far from the seas and lakes, somewhere under the fields of Kansas City, they found a giant sunken ship. How is this possible? Now you'll see. Some people spend their lives searching for shipwrecks with treasures underground. One of them is explorer David Hawley. He's been looking for such ships far from the seas, rivers, and oceans for many years. He does this because he likes the feeling of adventure. The holds of these ships may contain chests of gold, antiques, and artifacts. And you can get a lot of money for them. David says you don't have to go into the ocean to find a sunken ship. They may be lying in your backyard. But why do ships end up buried underground among fields, farms, and plains? Let's find out using the example of steamboat Great White Arabia. According to old records, the newspaper clippings, this ship had been carrying about 200 tons of treasure before it sank in 1856. Many rumors and local legends said the ship was lying underground a few miles northeast of Kansas City. It was there because people deliberately altered the riverbed and channels of the Missouri River in the second half of the 19th century. They artificially brought the shores closer to each other. They narrowed the river to increase the flow's speed, so boats could sail much faster. In the 19th century, steamboats were the most popular means of transporting passengers and goods. Before railroads, they extended the western border across the Mississippi and Missouri rivers and brought supplies to people. That's why it was so important to increase the speed of their movement. So, on September 5, 1856, Arabia was sailing along such an estuary. It came across a snag sticking out of the water. A piece of log quickly flooded the ship. Fortunately, all passengers were evacuated. But the steamer and its precious cargo reached the silt bottom of the Missouri River in a few minutes. Several years had passed. Everyone forgot about the vessel. During this time, the course of the Missouri River had changed. But Arabia remained under the wet, muddy bottom. The soil level above it was getting higher, and the ground was losing moisture. Eventually, many decades later, a cornfield formed above the sunken ship. In the 1980s, one farmer owned this area, and he had no idea what was hidden in his territory. David Hawley carefully studied the history of the sunken ships of the USA. He knew that hundreds of steamers had gone underwater all over Missouri. But most of all, he was interested in Arabia, as there were rumors that it was filled with gold and other valuable things. The territory of cornfields in Kansas was vast, but David Hawley knew how to search properly. In 1987, he started working, first together with his brother and father. They collected all the clippings from old newspapers they could find. They were looking not only for information about the steamer, but also for maps of the Missouri River. They tracked its historical changes, checked the dates, and identified a large area where the steamer sank. Next, they used electromagnetic testing and other geological stuff to study the soil and find the right place. They searched for differences in ground moisture and density. Then, they went through the territory with powerful metal detectors. And so, by the fall of 1988, they had determined the location of the steamer. Arabia was the size of a football field. This gigantic vessel lay 45 feet underground, 4 stories down. But before they started excavating, they had to ask the owner of the cornfield for permission. For the farmer, this news was a big surprise. He agreed on the condition that the excavations would be completed by spring so that he could sow a new crop. Digging a giant ship in winter is much more difficult and expensive than at other times. It includes additional equipment, electricity, and heating costs. The team worked day and night. They financed the excavations out of their own pocket. Each invested more than $10,000 and took out a bank loan. Finally, they noticed the first details of the ship. The shovels hit the huge engine boilers and the deck. The goal had been achieved. Most of the cargo lying inside the sunken ships is covered with rust, shells, mud, and is badly damaged. The contents of Arabia were in excellent condition, considering that the ship had sunk 130 years prior. Unfortunately, they didn't find the chests of gold. Still, they got several tons of other valuable cargo, household items of people who lived in the middle of the 19th century. It was a time capsule. The ship was carrying supplies for hundreds and thousands of people, and all these things were perfectly preserved. For example, they could clearly see the brand stamp Goodyear Rubber Company on one rubber shoe. The longer the excavations continued, the more things David and his team found. In the barrels, they found plates from the 19th century. They were intact and usable. Also, there were clean clothes, thousands of pairs of shoes, harpoons, frying pans, and umbrellas. The ship was carrying cargo to supply about 16 small towns. Yes, it's not gold, but such artifacts are also precious. The contents of the ship could be worth millions. However, the crew wasn't going to sell these things. They made a museum on the site of a former fruit market in Kansas City. If you go there, you will immediately feel like you're in a department store of the 19th century. There are thousands of items in good condition. Even the matches here are dry enough to light up. It took David many years to present the entire collection from the steamship. He values each of the items and doesn't want to sell them. Anyone can come here, pay for a ticket, and find themselves in the past. Who knows, maybe there's an old ship hidden in your backyard too. Geologists found an older vessel in the hot desert of Namibia in 2008. This ship sailed back in the days when pirates scared sailors on the seas, and now it's inside a dried-up lagoon. The ship sailed from Lisbon in 1533 and disappeared with the crew near a small diamond mining town. After almost 500 years, the hull had been badly damaged. Only the carcass of the ship remained, but the treasure hidden inside the vessel stayed intact. They carefully studied the boat for a long time, trying not to ruin anything. And then, 5 days later, they found a big old chest in the hold. Carefully opening it, they found gold coins there. Thus, the cost of the ship was estimated at about $10 million. The exact cause of the shipwreck is unknown, but experts believe the ship was destroyed by heavy cargo and bad weather. It went to the bottom of a lagoon that later became a desert. Some find an airplane in their backyard, others discover a ship, and one man found a passage to an ancient secret city in his house. This happened in Turkey in 1963. The owners of the building decided to make repairs. He went to his basement and knocked down the wall to turn this place into a living room. And so, behind one wall, he found a tunnel leading underground. The man thought it was some kind of a secret chamber. He went down there and realized it was something much more than that. It was an ancient city 18 floors deep. People built it in the years 780 to 1180 as a refuge from weather disasters and the invasion of enemies. This place also includes many underground tunnels that stretch for several miles in different directions. People could get to the town from different points using secret passages leading to these roads. The city can accommodate about 20,000 residents, livestock, and tons of food supplies. Archaeologists have also found a chapel, schools, stables, and public kitchens there.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.